Mariette, the Marquis's eldest daughter, with fiery curly hair, was deeply saddened. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she begged her father not to marry her to an old man she did not love. Mariette's younger brother sat next to her watching the proceedings. Her father insistently asked his daughter to calm down, while the little girl fretted, not understanding what was happening. The lady, depressed and sad, confessed that she could not endure another day of marriage with an old man who did not inspire a drop of feeling or respect. The man, the Marquis of Markwright, with long hair and a mustache, spoke tenderly to his daughter, asking her not to be upset. He confidently assured her that he would definitely find a way to get out of this situation. Covering his mouth with his hand, Alphonse quietly said that Count Juan had already given a warning, adding a note of alarm and concern to the conversation. Suddenly, a lady with a cane joined them. Her confident steps and presence immediately attracted the attention of everyone gathered. A young and at first glance fragile girl, stepping over the threshold with slight excitement, asked in a quiet voice how much more money their family would have to give to the Count. It was Blanche, the Marquis's second daughter, with straight fair hair and eyes as clear and transparent as a dewy morning meadow. The head of the family, immersed in deep thought and complete silence, greeted his child with great feeling and tenderness, as if he were meeting a long-awaited miracle. While Alphonse was coughing, Mariette angrily asked if her sister had ever considered that she might have to marry the disgusting Count for a paltry sum of money. Blanche, slightly looking away and with obvious regret in her voice, said that she had not meant anything like that, and sincerely apologized for any possible misunderstanding. The man stated that the interest was half of the remaining principal amount, so it was equal to half of the remaining debt. To the horror of the youngest daughter, it became clear what catastrophic consequences could occur if their family did not pay off the debt by the end of the month. The man, lounging languidly in a chair, a barely perceptible smile on his lips, and a relaxed demeanor, detailed another way to pay off his debts. For example, selling the mansion could be considered. A little girl with large bows on her head, full of anxiety and excitement with a pleading voice, began to beg her father not to commit this act, hoping that he would reconsider his decision. The youngest son, barely holding back a strong cough, covered his mouth with his hands, showing with his whole appearance that he felt very ill and needed rest, or even medical help. With tears in her eyes and a trembling voice, Mariette declared in despair that she would never be able to realize her dream of becoming the prince's wife, no matter how hard she tried. Sighing wearily, the man said that it was unlikely that they, even with all their efforts, could lay claim to the place of the royal couple, especially in their current situation. Smiling through her tears, the eldest daughter quietly, but with sincere joy in her voice, said that she would gladly marry him if she had the opportunity. Moreover, last month, a secret wedding took place between the lady and the third heir to the throne. The ceremony took place in the main temple, and only the two of them were present, hiding their happiness from the eyes of the whole world. Mariette was deeply convinced that even a man with such a high title would never allow himself to break this oath, because it was given before God himself, and its holiness could not be questioned. This came as a shock to the Marquis, who could not believe the words of his dear daughter, and was shaken to the depths of his soul, not imagining how such a thing could have happened. Alphonse was incredibly happy with this news, but at the same time, he could not understand why his sister decided to hide it from him, leaving him in the dark about such an important event. Moreover, a joyful Mariette with shining eyes said that if they had a child, even the emperor himself would certainly bless their marriage, realizing that this would strengthen the union and bring happiness into their lives. Blanche could not understand her friend's joy, because the third prince already had a bride, and despite this news, the current situation remained extremely complex and confusing. Feeling dizzy and overwhelmed by anxiety, the girl expressed her deep doubts and fears that His Majesty would hardly consent to such an unexpected marriage. Mariette suddenly had a brilliant idea, which she immediately rushed to discuss with her family, hoping that her idea would be as meaningful and inspiring for them as it was for her. Slowly, with a growing sense of bitterness, the girl began to reflect on the fact that the most beautiful girl in the kingdom had been decided to marry off to a fat, gray-haired old man because of debts which seemed like a terrible injustice. Pointing her finger at Blanche, the lady suggested that why not marry off the younger sister, instead believing that this might be a more suitable solution and would spare the elder one an unwanted fate. Suddenly, the little girl's face changed beyond recognition, and fear and terror were reflected on it like dark storm clouds obscuring the bright sunlight on a serene, clear day. Putting her hands on her sister's shoulders, Mariette began to persuade the girl to participate in the deception. They were very similar to each other, and that was why no one noticed the difference during the substitution. Thus, Blanche, having donned a snow-white wedding dress and become the Count's wife, would have had the opportunity immediately after their wedding night to secretly poison the scoundrel, keeping everything a complete secret. Many despised and hated the vile aristocrat, sincerely believing that his true place was in the next world, where he would suffer the deserved and inevitable punishment for his countless crimes. As a result, Blanche will become a rich widow, possessing not only an impressive fortune, but also living in complete luxury and abundance, surrounded by gold and expensive jewelry, enjoying every moment of her new life. The lady did not like this idea very much, and she burst into tears, unable to bear the realization that fate could take such an unexpected and tragic direction. The men of the Marquis's family looked at the lady with a tense and stern gaze, clearly expressing their disapproval and condemnation of her actions with their gloomy and uncompromising gaze. With an empty, detached look, Blanche stared into space, while the Marquise, with an expressive intonation, asked for help, begging to save Mariette and to agree to a deception in order to achieve this goal. A vivid image instantly appeared in his head, the Count revealing his wife's attempts to get rid of him and then severely punishing him for betrayal and treachery. Through her despair, Blanche said that her relative could very well have carried out such a cunning plan herself and destroyed her husband using all means to achieve her goals. A loud slap like a thunderclap struck the lady's cheek, leaving a painful mark on her delicate skin and causing a deafening sound that echoed throughout the room. It was Mariette, with an angry look directed at her stupid sister, who from the force of the blow fell to the floor and dropped her crutch in complete confusion and shock at what was happening. In a cold, contemptuous voice, she called the girl empty and selfish, pointing out her obvious focus solely on her own interests. Lying on the cold stone floor, Blanche sobbed. A pitiful, soul-stirring whine seemed to permeate the space around her, filling it with an oppressive feeling of hopeless despair and complete hopeless helplessness. Even the younger brother, who handed the cane to his sister, agreed with his father's words that Mariette would have had a better chance of marrying the prince if she had not been a widow. The boy, smiling sweetly, said that if all their problems with logs were solved, it would make their lives much easier and eliminate many of their current difficulties. Having roughly reproached the lady, the Marquis noted that despite her obvious deformities and disabilities, he had always taken care of her, but she, in response, behaved so meanly and ungratefully that his patience and kindness were undeservedly wasted. However, it was always like this. Even in family portraits, everyone acted as if Blanche were a flaw or a black sheep among them, standing out with her unusual and unpleasant presence. In the painting, the girl's face was covered with a patch of pink paint, which created the impression that someone had carelessly applied the color, distorting her features and expression, leaving only blurred contours and unclear outlines. With her face buried in her pillow, the little girl had no choice but to obediently submit to the will of the head of the family, whose decision was final and not subject to discussion. In utter despondency, the little lady realized that if she had not been such a kind and sympathetic soul, she would not have been able to survive in this cruel family where every step was full of trials and difficulties. Blanche declared loudly and decisively that she would prefer death to being associated with the vile aristocrat, whose company she found unbearable and disgusting. Mariette hastened to gently reassure her agitated father, assuring him that her words were merely an empty and calculated bluff designed to completely mislead his opponents and calm the unnecessary but growing unrest. This merciless phrase left a deep wound in the heart of the lady, whose life was already filled with endless difficulties and suffering, as if adding the final touch to her long list of trials. Turning away from her family and going to the window, Blanche could not contain the laughter that burst from her lips like a released stream under the influence of what she saw and heard. With a sad smile on her lips, she made the decision to link her fate with the Count, as if choosing between a heavy burden and an unknown but full of uncertainty path. All the relatives expressed their approval and genuine happiness, emphasizing how happy they were for the successful outcome and the significance of this event for the whole family. However, it was at this moment that Alphonse noticed something unusual and disturbing in his sister's behavior, which attracted attention and caused genuine concern. The girl's eyes looked empty and lifeless as she greeted her imaginary husband with an expression of complete concentration, as if she were in her own world of illusions. Without wasting time to think, Blanche leaped from the window, plummeting downwards, as if her body were driven by an inexorable force. This time, the lady was not exaggerating when she spoke of her readiness to face death. Bare feet walked across the cold stone floor, feeling how every unevenness and icy touch of the stone penetrated them, causing a persistent feeling of discomfort and constant cold. Blanche, dressed in a white dress, woke up with obvious surprise behind bars in a dungeon, realizing that she was trapped in a way she could never have imagined in her darkest thoughts. Next to her, in a dark corner of the cell, sat a man with black hair dressed in simple work clothes. His head down, his gaze focused on the floor, as if he was absorbed in deep thought. Cold blue eyes slowly rose, their gaze gliding penetratingly around the room, reflecting the anxiety and deep tension of the situation. Chains hanging from the ceiling tightly bound the man's hands, limiting his freedom and making every movement difficult as a symbol of his inescapable fate and lost freedom. The aristocrat stared at the stranger with surprise and silent delight, unable to believe her eyes. Her gaze was filled with a mixture of shock and deep wariness. On Blanche's face, as she recognized this man for their paths had crossed before, and the memories of their previous meeting suddenly came to life in her mind. The noblewoman woke up in a cozy and soft bed, surrounded by an atmosphere of peace and comfort that so pleasantly warmed her body and soul after a night's sleep, allowing her to slowly return to wakefulness. Looking around her room, the lady realized that she was not in the real world, but in a virtual game where every detailed space and every detail around her was part of a carefully crafted digital world. Looking around her room, the lady realized that she was not in the real world, but in a virtual game, a part of which the girl herself had previously taken part in the development. It was a thrilling dating simulator, starring a charming girl with snow-white hair that looked like sparkling snow swirls. Pierre was one of the potential love interests in the plot, while Blanche was his younger sister, and a minor character who did not have a significant impact on the development of events. Looking at her sore leg, the girl remembered that there was nothing like this in the game she had been playing so enthusiastically, and this thought caused a strange feeling of anxiety and bewilderment in her. A maid with her hair neatly braided into a bun entered her mistress's chambers, and bowing her head respectfully, asked if everything was all right and if she needed any help. The servants, covering their faces with their hands, could not hide their excitement. Their eyes expressed deep concern, as if every word that came out of their mouths was permeated with anxiety and fear of impending disaster. It was Fleur, and according to the system data, she was deeply upset and disappointed that the fragile lady had recovered so quickly and unexpectedly. Smiling her characteristic caustic smile, Blanche ordered the maid to immediately bring her a glass of water, thus emphasizing her superiority and position. The maid was shocked, and in complete shock, that her mistress, who had previously suffered from stuttering, suddenly stopped doing so, as if by magic having gotten rid of her old problem. Almost laughing at the lady, the servant reminded her that a priest had recently come to them, and after such a visit, Blanche would hardly be able to recover, since her condition now made her an invalid, possibly for the rest of her days. The system alerted Fleur that she had previously, in violation of generally accepted norms, shamelessly spat into a glass of water, leaving this disgusting stain on the contents. Throughout her life, the maids, despite the efforts of the mistress, constantly and mercilessly mocked and humiliated her, emphasizing her shortcomings and weaknesses at every opportunity. The lady's hand gripped the container tightly, her fingers digging into the material with overwhelming anger and indomitable determination. With each passing moment, the rage steadily built up within her, as if ready to burst forth. The water was suddenly splashed in the maid's face, causing her to scream in complete horror and confusion from the sudden shock, which led to instant confusion and a complete loss of self-control. The maid looked angrily at her mistress and addressed her with obvious bewilderment and anger in her voice, full of rage and incomprehension. Blanche gave Fleur strict orders to bring the head butler immediately to tell him something of the utmost importance and which could not be delayed. Clear and confident footsteps echoed down the long corridor, their booming echoes bouncing off the walls in the dead silence, instantly attracting the close attention of everyone nearby and causing them to listen with apprehension. The man responsible for managing the marquise's mansion entered the aristocrat's chambers and, addressing her attentively and respectfully, was ready to listen to all orders and instructions. The worker was sincerely glad that the lady had awakened, but he did not fail to note that the woman's mind was apparently still in confusion, hinting at a cruel act towards Fleur. Sitting in her bed, Blanche thoughtfully asked her uncle if her father was still as determined in his intention to marry her to the Count. Her voice trembled with excitement, and her eyes flickered with worry. The butler averted his gaze and nodded his head in silent agreement, as if trying to hide his true feelings. His gaze was filled with silent understanding. Smiling awkwardly, the servant restrainedly reported that the Marquis, demonstrating his influence, had arranged it so that instead of his eldest daughter, it would be Blanche who would become the Count's wife. In the original storyline, after the tragic death of her sister, Mariette was forced to become the wife of a despised aristocrat whose treachery and cruelty eclipsed even the darkest expectations. Pleased that Blanche had accepted her fate, the butler, with a slight smile, asked Fleur to prepare some aromatic tea to celebrate the moment. However, the young lady intervened, stating that there was no longer any need to prepare tea, as the maid who could have done so had already been dismissed. Shocked to the depths of her soul, the lady could not believe her ears, unable to comprehend how she could be deprived of a position that she considered an integral part of her life and status. The man tried to justify his reluctance to cooperate with the mustard, claiming that Fleur's dismissal could lead to unforeseen complications, which would certainly create additional difficulties. The girl's uncle himself was afraid that this foolish girl might tell someone about her unsuccessful attempts to take her own life, which caused him concern and anxiety. The noblewoman reminded him that the basement was empty and hinted that it should be used to punish the disobedient servant. The servants could not find peace and continued to ask their mistress many questions, trying to understand the reasons for her cruel behavior towards her friend, which seemed completely unfounded to hers. Suddenly, a sharp sound of a retaliatory slap echoed through the air, aimed directly at Fleur, causing no small amount of surprise among those present. Without showing any sympathy, the aristocrat declared that they had not been friends for the past 3 years. The woman's words rang out with cold cruelty, leaving everyone confused. With a cheeky grin, the lady suggested that the maid had really meant that the word friendship actually simply meant unquestioning service and the fulfillment of strict orders. Shocked by the sudden change in her mistress's behavior after a long sleep, Fleur froze in place in horror, unable to understand what could have caused such a drastic change. The male workers of the house grabbed the servants by the arms and, without saying a word, began to slowly and decisively lead them into the dark basement, full of determination to complete the task. The door slammed behind me with a bang, leaving only the echoes of the loud bang and a deep feeling of complete isolation in the air, as if the world around me had disappeared. Sitting on the bed, the girl reflected on the fact that this game was created especially for Anastasia, as if all the elements were aimed at satisfying her own needs and interests. It was not worth getting close to the main villain of this game and the protagonist of the hidden ending. A guy with black hair sitting on the bones of enemies and holding a weapon in his hands. This irresistible yet treacherous scoundrel was called Riccardo Giotto Digitalis. His name, which sounded like a poem, was shrouded in mystery and intrigue, engendering both admiration and fear. The photograph depicted smiling people joyfully celebrating the birthday of a mutual friend. Their happy faces and warm expressions created an atmosphere of celebration and friendly comfort. In her past life, Blanche was surrounded by love and care. She had reliable and devoted parents who provided her with a sense of security and stability. The guy was an incredibly sweet person, always ready to support and help out in difficult times. His care and kindness created a feeling of warmth, making him an invaluable friend and partner. Smiling sweetly, the father told his son-in-law that they were no longer expecting their beloved daughter and would not accept her return, thereby emphasizing the final decision that there was no turning back. Friends often scolded the main character for frequently not picking up the phone and not answering calls on time. They expressed their dissatisfaction and concern, considering such behavior disrespectful and annoying. However, sometime after the release of the long-awaited game, everything changed. Now she was confidently walking down the road, talking on the phone with a guy. As soon as a large truck came around the corner, The girl froze like a deer in headlights. Blanche stood there in complete daze, unable to move from the spot, from surprise and horror frozen in this tense moment. The phone slipped from my hands and fell to the ground, and the screen cracked, shattering into a multitude of small cracks that quickly spread across the rough surface. After her memories returned to her, the lady realized that no one in this life had truly loved her. This realization took the form of a bitter revelation, forcing her to reflect deeply on the merciless loneliness. The door opened, and the youngest son of the Marquez's family entered, smiling brightly as he greeted his sister. His joyful expression and warm greeting filled the room with light and comfort. Approaching his relative, he began to inquire about her well-being, genuinely surprised by the sudden cure for her stuttering, which seemed to have happened as if by magic. Blanche suddenly remembered that she could cure her leg with a magic ointment, which turned out to have amazing healing properties. Alphonse, leaning over the bed, irritably and angrily attacked the stupid girl, reproaching her for such a rash act, which almost destroyed all their carefully thought-out and strategically verified plans. Suddenly, the lady realized she could see the boy's status window, which stated that he was 10 years old, and described his abilities. At that time, the boy continued to complain that his older brother even had to call a priest. Comparing her status with the boy's, Blanche realized that due to high stress levels and low physical condition, her stats were significantly lower in all aspects. While the lady was pondering her morality, which was marked with strange squares, Alphonse became indignant, since his little sister did not pay any attention to him and did not listen to his comments. The boy, pretending to be sick, tried to evoke pity from his older sister, hoping that sympathy and compassion would help him achieve what he wanted. Suddenly, the girl came to the realization that the cunning Alphonse, pretending to be ill and evoking her pity, was in fact trying to manipulate her feelings in order to achieve his goal. If he were to present himself as much weaker than this little lady, all attention and focus would be directed solely at him. Clutching her bright dress in her fists and sobbing with grief, the girl babbled in a plaintive voice about the injustice of her favorite toy being given to her brother, leaving her without such a dear item. Holding his son close, the Marquise justified him, claiming that he was still very young and could not fully understand the consequences of his actions, which helped to soften the situation. Alphonse grinned wickedly as he watched Blanche endure this humiliating rebuke for her rude behavior. His mocking expression was full of pleasure, as she blushed with shame and painfully tried to hide her embarrassment. The boy, relying on his most sincere and reverent feelings, persistently continued to call his relative, who, as if enchanted by magic, flew among the clouds, not noticing his prayer. Alphonse, frightened, began to retreat, when having received no response other than a restless cough. He felt that his efforts had not been met with the desired response. The boy was deeply puzzled and embarrassed when his older sister suddenly revealed his cunning deception, depriving him of his last hopes of hiding the truth. Blanche, with obvious irritation and without a trace of tolerance, ordered that he immediately stop pretending, and also that he should not continue to feign deafness, making it clear that his fragile patience had reached its limit. When his fragile arm was suddenly grabbed, Alphonse was seriously frightened. Seized with panic, he began to scream loudly, demanding to be released immediately, as if his whole life was at stake at that moment. Even though the boy had enough strength to break free, he stubbornly continued to feign helplessness until the very last moment. This behavior seemed strange, but perhaps it was part of some plan no one suspected. With tears streaming down his cheeks, Alphonse desperately begged the butler for help, trying to convey the depth of his despair, and explaining that his dear sister had unfortunately lost her mind and was now in urgent need of immediate intervention. The guy, having barely freed himself, immediately began to pretend that his hand was experiencing unbearable pain, carefully trying to convince those around him of the seriousness of his condition. With a cold sigh, the servant declared that he would have to immediately report what was happening to the master, since the situation required his immediate intervention. Smiling sweetly, Blanche accepted the new turn of events with satisfaction, as she was now determined to leave behind the suffering and torment that had plagued her in the past and enjoy life to the fullest. The girl's status appeared next to the mark, and now the column reflecting her changes has significantly more squares symbolizing the changes. 3 years ago, when the boy turned 7, the Marquise congratulated his son with great joy, expressing sincere pride and pleasure at this significant event. Placing his hands on the boy's shoulders, The aristocrat reminded him with a warm smile that he would soon become a student at a magic academy where new and exciting prospects awaited him. Alphonse could not help but feel an internal pressure when the comparison between his younger son and his elder son was heard, causing him a feeling of involuntary rivalry and insecurity. The boy sat diligently at the table, surrounded by numerous papers, studying them intently, making notes, and notes completely immersed in his work. Leaning back in his chair and closing his tired eyes, he realized that 13 hours had already passed and looked at his watch in surprise, not believing that he had been doing his work for so long. Soon after this, Alphonse went to bed, and the doctor, who approached him with concern, began to carefully examine his health to make sure that everything was in order and not to miss any important symptoms. The doctor gave clear instructions that if Alphonse rested carefully for a few days, the flu should pass, and his physical condition would improve significantly. Suddenly, the doctor was interrupted by the patient, who, interrupting him with persistence, asked him to name a more serious illness for the relatives so that they would understand the seriousness of the situation. It was extremely important to him that the illness be so serious and dangerous that it would justify the impossibility of going to the academy and convince the family of the urgency of the situation. The boy tried to convince the worker that his request was justified, and as it turned out, it was beneficial to the worker himself since his father would pay for all visits. Being greedy for money and eager to use any opportunity to gain profit, the man without hesitation immediately agreed to the offer, seeing in it an obvious financial and personal benefit for himself. Alphonse could not believe his luck, not believing that he had managed to achieve such incredible success so easily and quickly, which seemed almost fabulous and completely unbelievable. At present, the Marquis stood next to his daughter, expressing his deep disappointment and explaining how much he was upset by her behavior, which did not meet expectations. Mariette, while calming her younger brother, simultaneously reprimanded her relative, condemning her for her false accusations and emphasizing how unlawful and unfair the maiden's accusations were. They all stood next to the bed of the girl, who had recently been visited by the priest, unlike the poor guy who was left aside and did not receive the same attention and support. With a cold smile, Blanche said that they were lucky to witness such a miracle that they might never see again, adding that the event would certainly be an unforgettable experience for them. The aristocrat demanded that his daughter immediately apologize to her relative, emphasizing that such behavior was absolutely unacceptable and needed to be urgently corrected. Blanche ordered her father to immediately fulfill one of two demands: either bring her brother to the priest right now, or send the bride's body to the count, emphasizing that delay or refusal were unacceptable. The man's hand touched the girl's cheek, and a loud sound echoed throughout the room, attracting the attention of everyone present. When the lady fell silent, the Marquise could not help but be indignant, surprised that someone like her dared to set conditions for him and make demands that he considered completely inappropriate and unacceptable. When Blanche stubbornly declared that in 2 months she would not be alive, the aristocrat, upset and offended by this statement, raised his hand to teach her a lesson and show that such words were an insult. Noticing her father's hand shaking, the girl suggested that perhaps their conversation should move faster to avoid wasting time on such awkward moments and to find a more constructive solution. Instead of striking again, the Marquis lowered his hand containing his anger and seemed to decide not to continue the conflict, focusing on a more balanced and calm approach to the situation. Instead of continuing the conflict, the man ordered the butler to immediately go for the priest, demanding that he come as quickly as possible. A frightened Alphonse turned away from his sister's comforting embrace, unable to cope with the growing fear and confusion that took hold of him at that moment. With a smile, a handsome man with long brown hair introduced himself as Ségolène, who believed in the teachings of the god of medicine and dedicated his life to serving these ideals. Blanche thanked the doctor with sincere gratitude and deep respect for being able to restore her voice, admiring his outstanding abilities and skill, which truly represent an art. Ségolène protested with deep regret, arguing that all this had been predetermined by the will of God, and that previously he had not had the ability to cope with such ailments, which, as it turned out, exceeded medical capabilities. The conversation was suddenly interrupted by an aristocrat who urgently called a doctor to check on the condition of his youngest son, who was concerned about his health. Before the healing began, The doctor reminded her that he was unable to treat chronic illnesses, but Blanche defiantly retorted that it was he who had cured the little girl of a serious illness. At that very moment, the men in the room turned to the nice lady sitting next to them and looked at her with respect and interest, as if they were not expecting her participation in the conversation or her opinion about what was happening. This made the Marquis himself think who with all his heart strove to cure the sick man, and the nobleman began to reflect on how this event could influence his plans and efforts. The Marquis expressed his request to the priest, asking him to examine the boy at least once to ensure his health and determine possible further steps for treatment. The healer could not refuse the aristocrat, especially given his insistent request and noble tone of address. So despite the possible difficulties, he immediately agreed to conduct a thorough examination. Alphonse, completely agitated, walked to the doctor on unsteady legs. His nerves and fear were so strong that every step was difficult for him, and anxiety about his own condition literally paralyzed his movements. The father carefully sat his son down on the sofa, trying to do everything to make his child feel comfortable and safe, and setting the scene for a calm and attentive examination. Ségolène began to use magic, which frightened the boy even more, and his anxiety increased as the sight of magical actions seemed even more frightening and unusual to him. Unwilling to participate in the healing process, Alphonse suddenly jumped to his feet, pushing his parent away with vigor, demonstrating determination and independence. On strong, healthy legs, the boy quickly headed toward the closed doors. Every movement was filled with the desire to overcome obstacles on the way to his goal. The father, deeply shocked by what had happened, remained sitting on the floor, surrounded by the doctor, and discouraged by the suddenness and seriousness of what had happened, feeling completely at a loss. The Marquise, with curiosity and wariness, inquired why the young man had suddenly run away, trying to understand the reasons for such abrupt and inexplicable behavior. The priest himself, confirming the words of the aristocrat, was also amazed by the enormous strength that was inherent in this small child, wondering how such majestic power could be contained in such a fragile body. The contented lady asked the father with interest why he did not go after his disobedient son, who had lied to teach him a lesson, expressing surprise at his inaction and lack of decisive action. Standing on his feet, the man couldn't believe that he had spent the last 3 years listening to lies from his own boy, feeling deep shock and betrayal from the deception that had been hidden behind the facade of trust for so long. Blanche could not hide her mockery. Her face broke into a contemptuous smile, reflecting all the disdain and malice towards what was happening. Heading towards the aristocrat's daughter, he tried to justify himself, but the girl firmly ordered him not to waste time on unnecessary excuses, interrupting his attempts to explain and cutting him off from further words. The nobleman was pleased that sweet Blanche understood her father's words so quickly and easily, noting how insight and understanding of the circumstances exceeded expectations. To this, the lady replied with a smile that she simply found it unpleasant to listen to someone else's voice, demonstrating her dislike for what was happening, with a slight touch of irony. The boy got it in spades from the stern Marquis, who in his anger spared neither strength nor emotion, expressing his displeasure and strict severity that was impossible to ignore. The aristocrat herself, who was assisted by the new maid, no longer cared about her family, and she completely lost interest in their affairs, focusing exclusively on her own interests and needs. Before leaving, the servant informed the lady that she would go to get a new change of clothes, to provide the necessary updates, and put the wardrobe in order. Blanche, comfortably settled in bed, was content with her solitude, enjoying the peace and privacy that this time alone afforded her. Virgo decided not to waste the moment, and opened her inventory, preparing to use all the necessary items and resources that might be needed in the current situation. Looking through her inventory, Blanche noticed a box full of tools and materials that she used to teach newbies. When the aristocrat touched the box's icon, it magically appeared on her lap, as if by the wave of an invisible hand, surprising with its mystery and instantaneity. The lady decided to open the box, which she expected to contain 4 items designed to help a newcomer quickly adapt to the game and begin his journey with confidence. The first item to appear was a bottle of green ointment, which had restorative properties and was intended to improve physical endurance. And then a world map appeared, which not only significantly simplified the process of orientation and navigation for the player, but also became his indispensable companion and faithful assistant in difficult adventures. Next, a free spin coupon was provided, which activated a roulette wheel where you could win a random item, adding an element of surprise. Finally, the game also features a white dragon egg, which hatches into a wise and powerful helper, ready to guide the newcomer and help them understand how this world works. Frustrated, Blanche began shaking the box, but the egg still did not fall out, leaving her completely confused and disappointed. The lady couldn't understand why the important object had disappeared. Was it because she wasn't the main character? Or was it because there were still 7 years left before the plot's denouement? Without wasting any time, the lady began applying the healing ointment to her feet, hoping that it would help her cope with her current problems and restore her strength. Suddenly, a blinding light flashed, capturing everyone's attention, causing Blanche to lose her bearings and plunge into complete confusion, unable to make out what was happening around her. The happy girl watched as her toes, which had been numb until then, began to gradually move, returning sensation and delighting her with their recovery. Slowly and carefully, the lady rose from the bed, making sure with each step she took on her own that her frail body was ready to move. Suddenly, a loud scream was heard from the shocked maid, who, not believing her eyes, watched as the mistress, whom everyone thought was bedridden, suddenly stood up and began to walk. Blanche, placing her finger to her lips and displaying a cold majesty, ordered the servants to remain silent, clearly demonstrating that no noise should disturb the carefully thought-out plan and disturb the perfect silence. The butler entered the room and, expressing restrained concern, asked the hostess whether the servant had committed any unacceptable acts or actions. Holding the maid's mouth, Blanche replied that despite the occasional incident where the maid had stepped on her foot, there had been no other problems overall, and everything else was in perfect order. When the man left, the girl ordered the worker to remain quiet and calm, threatening that if she did not follow the instructions, the same fate as Fleur would await hers. All trembling with fear and overcome with horror, the servants quickly and with a heavy heart assured their mistress that they would remain silent and strictly follow all instructions. When the aristocrat gave the order to dress her, the maid immediately rushed to carry out the command, trying not to miss a single detail and acting with maximum speed and precision. Mariette sat next to her little brother, looking anxiously at his face, which looked completely emaciated and haggard, which caused her deep anxiety and worry. Alphonse blamed all his troubles on Blanche, whose cunning plans had led to the failure of his own. Now, after this, the father was furious and upset, blaming his son for the failures that had occurred. The girl warned her brother that he should not express his thoughts so openly anymore, since their sister was soon going to become a countess, and any careless word could get them into trouble. She couldn't help but admit that Juan was far from the most pleasant person and showed himself to be a real abomination, but his colossal fortune and wealth made him an extremely influential and important person in society. With a mocking smile, Mariette declared that by marrying the wealthy, Juan Blanche would finally be able to truly help her family, because marriage to such a wealthy man would bring long-awaited financial support and stability. Hugging her brother, the girl asked him to help support her poor sister, hoping that their support and care would help her cope with difficulties and regain her lost strength. If this was not done, Blanche might disobey Mariette, who was smiling maliciously despite her hidden concern about the possible consequences. There were only 2 months left until the wedding, and the mansion, bathed in the morning rays, sparkled and shimmered as if covered in golden light, which gave it a special charm and created an atmosphere of anticipation. The maids waking the little lady informed her that her older sister was already waiting and advised her to wash and tidy herself up as quickly as possible so as not to delay the important morning meeting. When Blanche woke up, she couldn't understand what was happening. Her confusion and bewilderment only increased until she began to realize the situation around her. Yawning, the girl barely remembered how yesterday she had activated a free coupon for services, while the maid, with the utmost care and attention, helped her dress and carefully comb her hair. When midnight struck, the girl, with excitement and trepidation, spun the rainbow roulette full of bright colors and shimmers, hoping to receive the coveted gift from the systems. Despite all her efforts and expectations, Blanche only received a healing potion made by a low-class witch, which was contained in an inconspicuous simple bottle. The joyful maids told the young lady that Mariette was waiting for her for tea in the greenhouse, and also brought her a beautiful new dress with exquisite decorations. The girl, wearily dropping her head onto the pillow, said that she had no desire to go anywhere, which greatly frightened the servants who did not expect such a refusal and were at a loss in front of the unexpected decision. The ladies were not going to give in so easily, and in order to convince the girl, they enthusiastically presented her with an expensive dress from a famous atelier, as well as pearls given as a gift from Blanche's mother. It was impossible not to notice how old the piece was, as the pearl beads had numerous scratches on them, giving it a worn appearance. The dress now offered to Blanche had once been purchased by Mariette herself, but she had soon abandoned it as soon as she saw another lady in the same outfit. With a grin, the lady asked her maids if they really thought their mistress was so stupid as not to notice their cunning and tricks. Turning away from the servants and settling down on the bed, the girl sarcastically asked to tell Mariette that she was under no circumstances going to wear such expensive and beautiful things. Soon, a relative appeared in her sister's chambers, dressed in a beautiful blue dress, with bright red curls that effectively emphasized her sophisticated image. With a smile, the lady explained that this dress and jewelry were chosen by the maids who had no understanding of fashion, and therefore their choice should not be taken seriously. Blanche barely held back her laughter, noting how terrible the taste of her little sister's minions turned out to be, as if they did not know what real fashion and style were. These words angered Mariette, who sternly warned her that she should behave more politely, since she really did sincerely care about her and did everything possible for her good. Playing the part of an angel, the girl added that she had been caring for her father's younger children since their mother's death, emphasizing her self-sacrifice and constant attention to her family. In a cold and piercing tone, the heroine asked if the fact that Mariette had turned her into a cripple could also be considered a manifestation of care, like all the other actions that she tried to pass off as kindness and attention. The girl remained motionless, like a statue, her body frozen in one position, as if spellbound, and her eyes widened in surprise and shock, reflecting deep shock. The aristocrat, with an icy expression, and without the slightest hint of compassion, gave the order to all servants to leave the room, immediately demanding that they leave the space right now. As a result, the room was empty, and the girls were left completely alone, surrounded by a silence in which the echo of their own thoughts seemed especially loud. Leaning towards her sister, the noblewoman asked with curiosity and slight irritation what exactly she meant by uttering such nonsense, as if her words could reveal some important secret. Mariette tried to put pressure on Blanche, sternly ordering her not to utter such words in public again. Such words could cause serious harm or create an awkward situation. Unwilling to give in to Mariette's demands and bend under her pressure any longer, Blanche decided to give a decisive rebuff, demonstrating firmness and persistence in her refusal. The character originally had no limp, which was only the result of an accident that occurred when the poor girl was thrown off a ledge. It was the older sister who caused this, acting like a real villain, after which she fled the scene of the crime, leaving her relative to suffer the consequences. Mariette began to worry, and her cool calm quickly turned to alarm as she realized that the situation was rapidly getting out of control and threatened to have serious consequences. With a mocking grin, Blanche said that Mariette was worth nothing more than ordinary trash, and added that she could no longer bear her presence in this place. The little lady was indignant at this attitude towards herself, and feeling deeply offended, became hostile towards her sister. Her feelings were filled with anger and mistrust. The aristocrat hastened to remind that if Blanche were to disappear from the mansion at that moment, she would be the one who would have to become the wife of the vile count, whose intentions and reputation were far from the best. The curly-haired noblewoman sharply ordered him to stop this nonsense, immediately reminding him that she was her father's favorite daughter and could have become the wife of the prince himself. These words almost made Blanche burst out laughing, which she barely contained. If the third heir to the throne really intended to marry her, he would have paid a visit and made a formal proposal long ago. Mariette tried to justify her lover, claiming that the man was simply busy with his duties and did not have the opportunity to devote time to her, although this excuse seemed insufficient for all parties. Blanche called her sister a fool, claiming that she had chosen only a real womanizer as her husband, who did not deserve attention and respect. The older lady hastened to answer, reminding him that it was the relative who had no opportunity to move, much less escape, which deprived her of freedom of choice and action. Before leaving, Mariette left orders for her sister to begin preparing for the wedding, little by little, assuring her that this moment was just around the corner, and that all preparations needed to begin as soon as possible. Thinking about how careless the lady had been, Blanche decided that she herself was not going to put up with this marriage, and despite all the circumstances, intended to run away from the marriage in order to avoid this inevitable fate. At this point, a man with an unusual appearance asked the gentleman if he really was going to poison his bride, as if the question itself was unusually poignant and alarming. The aristocrat, taking a glass of drink in his hands, agreed with the statement that if the cripple dies, then the most beautiful woman in the kingdom will become his sweet wife. A servant with an earring and a beard reminded his master that the elder brother of the Marquis's family had agreed to become the Count's servant if he agreed to marry a girl with a physical defect. Juan had deep doubts that the spoiled boy could really help him in the smuggling business, since his inexperience and habit of a comfortable life could become a significant obstacle. Having bowed respectfully before the master, the servants hastened to carry out all his instructions, demonstrating complete submission and readiness to follow every order. His name was Ricardo, and the boy was covered with bruises and wounds, which clearly indicated the cruel trials and sufferings he had to endure, leaving visible traces of torture on his body. The servant mockingly asked if the owner was going to send money to the boy's father and keep him alive, as if that was the most important question in this situation. The aristocrat laughed, noting that if he had paid the full amount, his financial situation would have been halved. Such a burden would have been too great for him, and while the nobleman kept the boy in prison, the father had no right to even utter a word. Ultimately, Juan would become the richest man on the continent and acquire the most beautiful wife, which would ensure a prominent position in society. Night fell, and the house sank into silence, as if enveloped in a soft blanket of darkness, where every detail took on a new mystical charm under the moonlight. The Marquis entered his daughter's room and began to speak with displeasure about how disrespectfully the maiden had begun to behave lately, noting that her behavior had become a real disappointment to him. When asked if the girl wanted to tell her father something, Blanche shook her head, not wanting to share her thoughts and problems. Moreover, the lady stated that it was the Marquis who should apologize to his own blood, emphasizing that he himself was the culprit of the current misunderstandings and conflicts. To the man, this seemed ridiculous, since the nobleman did not understand how one could expect him to apologize for something that he himself considered insignificant or unlawful. The Marquise asked that they not be blamed for the incident, explaining that the girl had decided to jump from the balcony herself, as a result of which she had broken both legs and lost the ability to walk, which was a tragic consequence of a thoughtless act. The distraught girl admitted that she had long ago realized that to her father, she was nothing more than a cripple. This realization only worsened the little girl's suffering. The aristocrat did not understand why the lady distorted the facts in this way, playing the victim and evoking sympathy instead of admitting her role in the current situation. Blanche replied that it was in her blood, as if she could not shake off the innate tendency to manipulate and dramatize that in the female view was part of her nature. The woman reminded the relative that she was currently bearing the brunt of all the family's problems, and the responsibility for solving them had become a heavy burden that the girl bore with difficulty. Taking a cup of tea, Blanche added that despite all her efforts, she would not be able to convince her father about the upcoming marriage, no matter how much she tried to change his mind or influence his decision. In an effort to expose her father, the noblewoman asked if he could sell at least part of the mansion to improve his financial situation and thus help his daughter in a difficult situation. The man hesitated, embarrassed, and was unable to utter a word, clearly demonstrating by his behavior that he did not know how to answer this awkward question. Blanche already knew the answer. The Marquise had no intention of helping, and her intuitive understanding of the situation only strengthened her feeling of disappointment and hopelessness. With a voice trembling with anger, the girl ordered her relative not to raise his voice at her any more, demanding respect and an end to any attempts to humiliate her daughter. The girl, sweating with rage, declared that she would commit suicide on her wedding day, and before leaving would tell her husband that her father was the reason for her actions. These words were full of determination and despair, leaving behind a dark premonition. Suddenly, the system alerted Blanche that a poisonous ingredient had been added to her tea, which immediately caused her to feel a sharp sense of alarm and caution, causing her to sharpen her vigilance. The image of the father slowly began to lose its shape, as if the shadows and light in the room began to distort and blur, his face turning it into a vague and indefinable vision. Blood poured from the girl's mouth, covering her lips and chin, indicating serious internal injuries and imminent danger to her life. The man, noticing how his daughter suddenly began coughing in a fit, immediately stood up from his seat, not hiding his confusion and deep concern, and hurried to her. The Marquise, in panic and despair, called for help, but his cries went unanswered, and there was not a single person around who could come to his aid at this critical moment. Suddenly, the lady remembered the magic potion that was in her inventory. The little girl hoped that this remedy could help in the current situation. However, in the presence of an aristocrat, it was unsafe to open one's inventory, as this could arouse suspicion and lead to undesirable consequences. Clutching her parents' clothes, Blanche asked him with anxiety and despair to immediately bring a doctor, her voice trembling with excitement and fear for her own condition. The nobleman resolutely rushed to find a priest who could provide assistance in the current situation, hoping that his intervention could bring relief and salvation. The little lady herself, using her last strength, opened her things, and with difficulty took out the potion, trying to press on it, hoping that this remedy could ease the suffering and change the course of events. Swallowing quickly, the noblewoman began to drink the potion, trying to absorb it as quickly as possible, in the hope that this remedy would help her cope with the disease and relieve the symptoms. Exhausted and losing consciousness, the aristocrat, unable to stand on her feet, fell onto the sofa, her frail body trembling and her breathing becoming increasingly intermittent. The luxurious black carriage slowly drove through the square, its shiny wheels shimmering in the sun, and its exquisite details and gold embellishments giving it the appearance of a true symbol of status and grandeur. Inside the carriage sat a handsome young man with fiery red hair, dressed in elegant and carefully chosen clothes that emphasized his refined style and status. It was Pierre, a relative of Blanche, who was renowned as the most handsome man on the continent and a local genius. His charisma and outstanding intellectual abilities made him an object of admiration and respect among all who had the pleasure of knowing him. As the man stepped out of the carriage, a loud cry was heard, which sounded like a call for a brother, reflecting the excitement and impatience that the relatives felt in anticipation. At that very moment, the Marquis's youngest son, without holding back his emotions tightly, embraced his eldest, expressing his joy and relief at their long-awaited meeting. Alphonse sobbed loudly, admitting how much he missed his relative. Large tears were full of sincere despair and relief from their long-awaited meeting. Pierre himself, clearly worried, asked about Blanche's well-being, the man's voice trembling with worry and tension, showing how deeply he was worried about her condition. Alphonse hesitated, not knowing how to answer the question asked. His face turned pale from embarrassment and anxiety, and he was completely confused, not knowing how to accurately and correctly report on his sister's condition. Sitting in the comfortable living room next to the Marquis, Pierre, showing deep concern, asked about what had happened to the girl who had been poisoned 10 days ago. The aristocrat himself could not believe that anyone could have evil intentions towards such a defenseless little girl. He was shocked and stunned by the thought that someone could harm her, and he could not accept this terrible reality. Pierre hastened to reassure the nobleman, trying to relieve his anxiety and fear, assuring him that Blanche possessed incredible strength of spirit and resilience that would allow her to overcome all trials and certainly survive despite her dangerous condition. Covering his face with his hand, the aristocrat also tried to cope with his anxiety and uncertainty, hoping that his inner fears and doubts would not prevent him from believing in the best and maintaining hope. The boy supported his father, helping him reach the room while he complained about his fate. His words full of despair and indignation, Mariette soon joined them, her face lit up with joy at the sight of her older brother's return. The happiness was indescribable, and she greeted the boy with relief and excitement. The girl spoke of being very upset and experiencing deep fear for her future if Blanche did not recover. Her words were filled with despair as she realized how much her own happiness depended on her sister's health. When asked what she had been talking about, Mariette reminded her relative of the Count, whom she was destined to marry in the worst future. Not understanding his sister's cruelty, Pierre was deeply worried about Blanche, who seemed to be eager to leave them and go to another world, leaving behind only darkness and doubt. The girl herself stated that Juan was to blame for everything, as he desperately sought to marry the most beautiful lady in the kingdom, sparing neither means nor effort to achieve his goal. These words caused the man deep upset and considerable disappointment, leaving him in a state of complete inner turmoil and emotional turmoil that was impossible to ignore. The girl was confused when asked whether she was more worried about Blanche or her own well-being, and was unable to immediately find a suitable answer reflecting her inner confusion. Pierre himself was well aware that Mariette was only concerned about her own interests and well-being, not paying attention to those around her and their problems. The girl said mockingly that her brother always portrayed her in an unfavorable and negative light, trying to belittle her virtues and exaggerate her shortcomings. Pierre, consumed by deep frustration and inner turmoil, remained silent, unable to find the right words to respond to the harsh reproaches and inappropriate accusations that continued to pour in. The girl, with a slight hint of mystery, shared with the boy that Blanche, it turns out, remembers all the events and details that it would seem could be forgotten. After this, she added that her dear brother, at that moment, was her only ally, completely sharing her views and experiences and supporting her in the most difficult times. After all, at that fateful moment, the two of them threw the girl off the cliff, and then, filled with malice and self-satisfaction, they drove away, laughing and smiling, leaving the little girl in complete defenselessness and danger. One day, when Blanche was only 9 years old, the whole family went to a country villa to spend time in solitude and enjoy the tranquility of nature far from the bustle of the city. The older children couldn't stand the younger one feeling constant irritation and discontent towards her, which sometimes resulted in minor and major nagging and displays of disrespect. They found it extremely unpleasant to have a sister with speech problems, which further aggravated their dislike for her and caused constant irritation, creating constant conflicts and discontent in the family. Fearful and trembling with fear, the girl found herself on the edge of the cliff, her heart beating wildly and her gaze fixed on the abyss that opened before her. Mariette, with a smile on her face, said that if Blanche remained sitting on the cliff until tomorrow, they would play together as soon as the new day came. The boy promised to bring sweets after the meal to treat Blanche and brighten the baby's weight despite the difficult situation. The girl had no choice but to meekly agree, accepting her difficult fate and trying to find comfort in the promises that were given to her. After this, the older children left, leaving the girl alone without any consolation or support, immersed in her loneliness and fear. They had no intention of keeping their promises. Instead, the older children planned to take their sister's food and have a fun time without her enjoying the freedom of her presence. For Blanche began only 3 days after her disappearance. She was eventually found in the rain, lying on the grass, weak and exhausted, but still alive. Thus, the third child of the Marquise's family became lame. The girl lay unconscious on a pillow, her condition leaving many questions and concerns. But suddenly, as if by magic, bright green eyes opened wide, radiating an incredible combination of surprise and faint hope despite the previous state of unconsciousness. Rising from the bed, the aristocrat clutched her head as if trying to cope with a headache or a difficult memory. Her face was distorted with pain and confusion. Getting out of bed, the little girl slowly walked towards the window. Although her steps were uncertain, and her gaze was fixed on the world outside the glass, in anticipation of comfort or new impressions, she was convinced that it was Juan who had given the order to poison her, and this thought haunted her, making her doubt the intentions of those around her and her own safety. The lady opened her inventory to check its contents, her gaze running over items that could be both useful and potentially dangerous in the events to come. Now she had to reconsider her previous escape plan, and Blanche chose a world map to carefully plan a new route and prepare for the next stage. Suddenly, as if by magic, a sheet of paper materialized out of nowhere in front of the little girl, as if magical forces had created it, adding something amazing to the surrounding atmosphere. The lady made a bold and decisive decision to leave the majestic kingdom of Lupin, seeking to free herself from the strict control of her father and start a new life filled with freedom and opportunities for her own happiness. Blanche was looking for a place where she could remain unnoticed, where someone else's identity would be difficult to discover, and where it would be easiest for a woman to find work. The card instantly disappeared from the woman's hands as if it had dissolved into thin air, followed by a loud echoing sound that heightened the tension of the moment. Nearby, as if out of nowhere, the older brother appeared, his appearance imbued with deep concern. His gaze, full of worry, spoke of how much he worried about his little sister. The little girl, as if nothing had happened, stood calmly next to the window, as if all the surrounding chaos did not affect her, and she was in her own unperturbed world. The man, realizing the situation, immediately realized that the little girl might be planning to jump out of the window again. This thought was filled with alarm and anxiety, as Pierre feared that her previous intention might be repeated. The guy moving quickly towards the girl tried to stop her, but suddenly stumbled and fell, losing his balance and barely keeping his feet. The Marquis's son fell to his knees, full of remorse, and with sincere regret, asked forgiveness for the mistake he had made in the past, realizing the full gravity of his actions. Blanche greeted her old relative with a gentle smile, expressing her sincere joy that he had finally deigned to return home after a long absence. The girl, walking confidently on her own feet and without relying on a crutch, came closer to him, demonstrating her independence and joy at the meeting. With a smile on her lips, the little girl extended her hand to the boy, and with genuine delight in her voice, said that she wanted to take a good look at her brother to enjoy the long-awaited meeting. Pierre was completely shocked to discover that the little girl could move on her own. The surprise was so great that he could hardly believe his eyes when he saw the lady moving on her own 2 feet without any help. Blanche explained that her brother had previously broken her legs. However, thanks to her healing, the girl was able to relearn how to walk, regaining her independence and confidence. Feeling deeply guilty for his past actions, Pierre turned away, sincerely asking for forgiveness again, his voice trembling with remorse, and the man tried his best to make amends for his mistake. The little girl sat down next to the boy, trying to calm him down. With warmth and support, the little lady said that now Juan would be content and happy. With empty eyes, the girl said that she was now in no way inferior to Mariette and would make a good wife to an aristocrat. These words were full of determination, despite the lifeless look reflecting a desire to take her place. After this, the lady added that if the good brother had been able to ask the princess for help, she would not have been sent to be torn to pieces by the scoundrel. There was a bitterness in her voice, reflecting disappointment at the current circumstances and the injustice. Placing her hand on the tall man's shoulder, Blanche quietly said that she no longer blamed him for what had happened, but she wanted to ask him for something important. Clutching at these words as if they were his last hope, Pierre exclaimed, asking what exactly his little sister wanted. There was an impatience and a sincere willingness to help in the expectation of a clear answer to a question that was important to him. The truth was that in 7 years, the world was going to change dramatically. Monsters were expected to emerge who would be merciless, disrupting the old order and posing a threat to all living things. The arrival of Saint Anastasia was soon expected, who intended to bring hope and salvation to all residents by eradicating disasters and evil. The lady's mission was aimed at restoring peace and protecting people from the impending threat. However, during the struggle, many minor characters were killed, including Blanche, a loss that was devastating to the families. Ultimately, there was only one city left on the map, suitable for escape: Digitalis, which was high on the list of places where one could find peace amidst the chaos and destruction. Ricardo, the heroine's main adversary and the source of many misfortunes, happened to reside in this city. Digitalis, though remaining her last refuge, also turned out to be the villain's lair. The lady asked her brother to take her to the treasury, expressing a desire to examine it. There was urgency and hidden hope in her voice. It was in the treasury that the white snake bracelet, possessing the unique property of doubling experience gained, was located. This valuable artifact was intended for the main character, and Pierre planned to gift it to her in the future. Wiping tears from her cheeks, Blanche recalled how they had visited the treasury together when she was still slow and unable to accompany them. Those times filled her heart with nostalgia and warm memories. Pierre immediately grabbed his sister's hands, full of determination and care, and promised that tomorrow he would go to his father and try to find the key to the treasury. The lady rushed to hug the boy, her voice trembling with gratitude as she uttered her words of appreciation. The little girl hugged him tightly, unable to hide her emotions, expressing all her gratitude and joy. Immediately wiping away her false tears, the girl admitted with sincerity in her voice that Pierre was the only one in the family whom the little girl could completely trust. The golden key, glittering with jewels, sat in her hand, like a symbol of importance and value. Its exquisite shine emphasized how much this item meant for the fulfillment of a wish and the opening of a treasure trove. The Marquis passed the key to the treasury to his child, symbolizing not only access to the treasures, but also a special responsibility. It became an important part of the legacy passed down from generation to generation. Sitting in her wheelchair, Blanche sincerely thanked her father. Her voice filled with deep appreciation, and her eyes shone with genuine gratitude, reflecting all the warmth and appreciation for his support. The key was carefully extended into the girl's fragile hands, which were stretched forward as if reaching for this precious symbol of hope and change. Grasping the arms of the chair, the father was determined to help Blanche. Such support and care were obvious, and he was ready to do everything possible to help his daughter overcome difficulties. As they passed her older brother, the little girl put her finger to her lips, asking him to keep quiet about the fact that she could now walk on her own. Yesterday, Pierre made a solemn promise to guard his sister's secrets, vowing that he would keep them in the strictest secrecy despite all possible trials and difficulties. The family was soon joined by an older girl who greeted them with a warm smile. Mariette was wearing a new dress, with her hair neatly pulled back. The girl hurried to meet her father, her face expressing concern and anxiety. Her father, with obvious worry in his voice, asked what had happened, sincerely wanting to know the reasons for this unnecessary worry. After this, the noblewoman approached her sister, and with obvious excitement in her voice, announced that her impatience regarding the visit to the treasury had reached its peak. Under the watchful gaze of her family and friends, with some trepidation, Blanche carefully inserted the key into the door lock, as if this moment was full of special meaning and symbolism for everyone present. The door opened slowly, and the Marquis' family, filled with excitement and anticipation, stepped over the threshold with grace and respect, entering inside. Mariette couldn't help but notice how much the treasury had emptied since their last visit. The sight of the jewels displayed on the shelves, which had once sparkled with wealth, now filled her father with deep sadness. In the corner of the room stood an elegant box, from which protruded a bracelet shaped like a snake. This piece of jewelry lay like a precious secret, holding within itself an enigmatic beauty and ancient history. Approaching her father and looking at him with curiosity, Blanche spoke cautiously, asking a question about the mysterious object that was inside. Smiling with aristocratic grace, the father declared that it was an object related to the white snake. His tone was full of pride and mystery, as if this object were not just decoration, but a true symbol with a history. It turned out that this jewel once belonged to an aristocrat who was once the princess of a mysterious and magnificent desert kingdom. Blanche asked her relative to try on the item at least once to make sure it fits perfectly and looks as intended. The piece looked exceptionally elegant on the lady's thin and fragile wrist, emphasizing her refined grace and exquisite style. The lady stared at her note in surprise, where it was stated that the jewelry not only emphasized her elegance, but also protected her from curses and poison, adding an extra layer of mystical securities. While the aristocrat carefully examined the bracelet, her older sister watched her closely, clearly experiencing mixed feelings of curiosity and wariness. Mariette loudly and decisively exclaimed that she also wanted to try on this decoration, not hiding her desire to be the center of attention and enjoy the moment. But Blanche only pulled her hand away, saying that her relative had already tried on this jewelry as a child, and now she herself wanted to enjoy this wonderful moment. The men also sided with the younger member of the family, emphasizing that this day belonged only to her, and expressed their support for the lame lady. As if nothing had happened, the little girl turned to her father with an unperturbed expression, asking him with interest about the engraving that hung strangely on the wall, demonstrating genuine curiosity. Lost in thought, the man did not know where to begin his story, and was internally tormented by the search for an appropriate way to begin the story so that it would sound correct and attractive. Blanche herself decided to take advantage of the moment when the Marquise was distracted and act decisively to achieve her goal without missing a precious chance. Right before Mariette's eyes, the aristocrat, without hiding her intentions, deftly hid the jewelry in the folds of her clothing, demonstrating an amazing ability to conceal her secret plans. The elder sister was deeply indignant and, unable to restrain herself, decided to immediately tell her father about all the events that had taken place, considering it her duty. However, the Marquis simply brushed his daughter aside, not understanding what was happening to her and not paying due attention to her worries and indignation. Immediately replacing her expression of irritation with mercy, Mariette put on a naive and kind face, assuring that she had simply imagined it in order to smooth over the awkwardness and calm the situation. The aristocrat continued to speak enthusiastically about the preserved image of their ancestors, sharing with keen interest the history associated with this precious artifact. Meanwhile, Mariette was developing an elaborate plan to expose Blanche, who had secretly stolen an ancient family bracelet that had been passed down to every new generation. After some time had passed, the Marquis could not believe that the bracelet with the snake had disappeared and continued to be tormented by doubts, not understanding how this could have happened. Sitting surrounded by his family, the man could not understand how this could happen because it was a valuable relic that should have been kept in absolute safety. Soon intervened, suggesting that they begin searching for the missing piece of jewelry in Blanche's room, considering this a logical step in solving the mystery of the bracelet's disappearance. The nobleman, perplexed, asked what exactly his eldest daughter had spoken about, trying to make sense of her words and understand whether they could have any connection to what had happened. Immediately, the young lady was accused of having stolen the family jewel, and the entire room was plunged into tense anticipation of confirmation or denial. The father could not believe that Mariette was trying to blame her younger sister, while the girl herself insisted that they immediately search the baby's room in search of the missing thing. The Marquise, without wasting a minute, decisively gave orders to the butler to immediately conduct a thorough search of all the rooms of the house in order to restore order. The bracelet was soon found and carefully placed on a soft red pillow, giving the occasion a finished look and returning the jewel to its rightful place. The aristocrat himself, clutching his head, could not understand how this could have happened and was completely perplexed, trying to comprehend what had happened. Mariette mockingly and self-confidently claimed that she had been convinced from the very beginning that her sister was deceiving her and knew about the secret plan despite all her attempts to hide the truth. But then the servant intervened in the conversation, interrupting it and introducing new details that could change the course of events and shed light on what was happening. Bowing to the gentleman, he announced that the decoration had been found in Mariette's room, thereby causing surprise and increasing tension in the room. A stunned silence fell over the room. No one dared to utter a word. Everyone was lost in their own thoughts, trying to comprehend and digest the unexpected incident that had left them in shock. The elder lady began to actively deny all the accusations, calling them nonsense and ridiculous fabrications, thus trying to protect her dignity and justify herself to everyone. She began to assert that she had taken nothing from the treasury, insisting on her complete innocence and expressing deep bewilderment at the words that had arisen. But at that moment, the servant again confirmed that the bracelet was found in her dressing table, adding new evidence to the unfolding case and increasing suspicions. Approaching her sister, she asked if it was Blanche's doing, trying to figure out who was really behind the disappearance of the jewelry and decide how best to proceed in the current situation. Leaning towards her sister with an expression full of anger and contempt, Mariette firmly blamed her for all the troubles that had happened, declaring that it was her younger relative who turned out to be the real swindler who had set her up. The Marquis sided with his younger daughter, firmly ordering his eldest to immediately apologize for her unfounded accusations and interference, thereby restoring justice. Mariette fell silent, unable to find the words to respond to her father's stern command. Her face was full of confusion and bewilderment as she stood in complete silence, realizing that no words could justify her actions. Crying, she desperately told her parent that it was the pure truth, trying to convince him of her innocence and convey that her accusations were based on real facts and not fiction. Blanche, clutching her head and feigning pain, stated that she would like to go to her chambers to rest, thus trying to avoid further proceedings and divert attention from her role in the incident. Pierre, possessing a truly gentlemanly demeanor, offered his assistance in escorting her to her quarters. His kindness and consideration were evident, and he readily demonstrated politeness, striving to ensure his sister's comfort and safety. The girl lay in bed on soft pillows and a cozy blanket, immersed in the semi-darkness and silence, trying to find peace and solitude after a busy day. The man himself sat nearby, lost in thought. The game's system confirmed his suspicions that Blanche was involved in deception, intensifying his inner discontent and doubts. Looking at the gameplay notification on the screen, the little girl turned to her brother with a question, trying to understand how to proceed and what steps to take to continue the game. Quietly, with expressive embarrassment, she confessed her guilt to her relative explaining that it was she who was at fault, and described in detail how the bracelet ended up with her sister, thereby revealing all the details of her actions. The girl herself explained that before leaving the house, she wanted to cool her sister's ardor, hoping to calm her down for a while and perhaps make her think about her actions. The little girl admitted that she had no intention of walking down the aisle instead of Mariette, as it might have seemed, but had completely different plans that were not connected with such an important step as marriage. The man tried to convince his sister that if Juan was dissatisfied, it could lead to serious consequences for their entire family, putting them in a dire situation and ruining their reputation. Blanche herself tried to explain that she was poisoned not by accident, but because the Count only needed Mariette, and she found herself at the center of his plans. Still smiling, the lady turned to her brother and asked whether the younger daughter, in addition to being expected to marry, was also expected to become a sacrifice and die for the older one. The aristocrat fell to his knees, screaming in despair that this should never have happened, experiencing a deep fear of losing his dear sister and not knowing how to cope with this tragic turn of events. The man who survived that terrible day from the past prayed to God every day for Blanche's recovery, sincerely hoping that her suffering would soon end and she would be able to return to normal life. Standing on her feet, the girl firmly ordered her brother to finally come to his senses and stop allowing grief and fear to take hold of him, calling on him to show fortitude and courage. Coldly and confidently, the little girl stated that no God had saved her, and that it was she who had helped herself overcoming difficulties and finding ways to cope with the situation. Tears came to the boy's eyes as he realized how much effort and suffering had gone into her own rescue, and how difficult it was to admit that it was strength and determination that had played the key role. Grabbing her brother's face in her hands, Blanche sternly ordered him to seek forgiveness, not from God, but from his own sister, reminding him of the importance of redemption in the family and mutual support. The lady asked to dedicate her attention and care only to her at least once, emphasizing how important it was for her to feel special and loved, even if it was only for a short moment. Mariette was furious, realizing that she was being punished for something she had not done, and feeling a deep sense of injustice for everything that had happened to her. Then suddenly, the girl was distracted by a voice that came from behind, interrupting her thoughts and drawing her attention to the unexpected source of the sound. It was a maid who wanted to tell her mistress something important, drawing attention to urgent information or a matter that required immediate consideration. A shocked Mariette demanded an explanation from the maid about what she meant when she said that Blanche could walk, not believing her ears and trying to understand how this could be. The maid said she had seen with her own eyes the younger mistress walking without crutches, shocking with her unexpected confession and raising new questions about Blanche's health. In exchange for information, the servants asked that Fleur be taken out of the basement, fearing that she might have died and insisting that she be released immediately. The lady realized that, given this scenario, the bracelet had most likely been planted by Blanche, which cast the entire incident in a new light and confirmed all suspicions. Turning away from the servants, the girl decided to immediately meet with her father to discuss the current situation and find out all the details of what was happening, striving to gain clarity and understanding. The Marquis, as expected, did not believe his daughter, firmly declaring that it was nonsense and refusing to take her words seriously until he received convincing evidence. Mariette persistently tried to convince her father to go to Blanche's room to check if there was really anything suspicious there and to find out what was really going on. But then came the unexpected news that Blanche and Pierre had left the mansion together, causing further surprise and raising further questions about their disappearance and plans. After thinking about what had happened, Mariette asked if the white snake bracelet was still there, fearing that its disappearance might be related to the recent events and the information leak. Suddenly, the butler burst into the office with urgent news, interrupting the conversation and drawing everyone's attention to the urgent message that the snake relic had gone missing. The carriage sped along the road, with the Marquis' son at the controls, showing skill and determination in the face of urgent need. A pursuit began for the escaped children. The aristocrat, mounting his horse, set off in pursuit, relying on his speed and skill to catch up with them. Gradually, they approached the transport, which was under Pierre's control, each step bringing them closer to the fugitives. The man, radiating icy calm, sternly ordered his son to stop the carriage, immediately, not tolerating any delays, and demanding from him complete precision and speed in carrying out this order. Raising his pistol menacingly to the night sky, the nobleman fired with a decisive gesture, his shot ringing out loudly in the silence, tearing apart the darkness of the night and filling the surrounding space with a tense echo. The horses, panicked, rebelled abruptly, rearing up on their hind legs and emitting menacing neighs, their movements full of chaos and wild energy, creating the impression of complete disorder. The carriage began to gradually slow down its movement, becoming more and more sluggish and hesitant, as if under the influence of an unknown force. Soon, the vehicle overturned with a dull crash, breaking the peace of the night and plunging everything around into chaos and confusion, breaking the silence and creating an atmosphere of disorder. Pierre fell to the ground and hit a tree with a dull thud that suddenly appeared in his path, leaving painful marks and considerable pain on the man's body. The Marquis dismounted from his horse, worried about the health of his son, who was at that time in a dangerous situation. Anxiety was reflected on his face as the nobleman hurried to him, wanting to help and comfort him. The nobleman's house attendant, who was caring for the young man, reported that he was fine. He had simply lost consciousness temporarily, which caused everyone some concern, but had no serious consequences. Suddenly, the Marquis, overcome with great anxiety, remembered his daughter. In an anxious impulse, he immediately rushed to find out what had happened to her, and in what condition the lady was now. The servants approached the carriage doors with the intention of opening them, paying attention to every gesture in order to carefully pull the master's daughter out from inside and ensure her comfortable exit. Inside, a girl sat with long brown hair that fell over her shoulders, creating a delicate contrast with her elegant outfit and drawing attention with its soft, sparkling texture. The worker informed the gentleman that the lady was also unconscious, adding that this condition was of serious concern and that necessary measures to provide assistance were already being taken. Sitting down next to his daughter, the Marquis whispered in despair for her not to die, squeezing her hand and relying on the last hope he could find in this painful moment. He was concerned that their family would not be able to pay off the debt to the Earl without the younger lady. Her health was critical to their financial situation. However, unexpectedly, instead of Blanche, another person appeared before them, who only wore a wig with red hair, exactly the same as the Marquis's daughter, creating a complete illusion of confusion. The aristocrat could not understand how this could happen, being completely perplexed by the fact that a complete stranger appeared in front of him instead of his daughter, which only added to the unanswerable questions. The events took place in the nobleman's mansion 3 hours ago, under cover of night, when the dark twilight hid the details of what had happened, and only rare flashes of light could clarify the mysterious atmosphere of the incident. The father of the family himself was convinced that his daughter was planning to go to the port, where she could board a ship and leave, seeking to avoid the consequences and start a new life far from home. The aristocrat ordered his assistants to immediately follow the fugitive's trail to find her and bring her back, realizing the importance of preserving the family and eliminating debts. The curious townspeople gathered together and began discussing possible escape scenarios, constantly wondering what would happen next and gossiping among themselves about how events might unfold. One of the maids stood out from the rest, not only because of her refined manner of behavior, but also because she stood at a distance from the others. Quietly, when no one could notice her, she carefully walked out into the street, trying not to attract unnecessary attention and maintaining her caution in every movement. It was Blanche who, with remarkable ingenuity and dexterity, managed to escape secretly from home, skillfully using her abilities and knowledge to leave no trace and avoid being noticed. Pierre, finally recovering from the sudden and shocking shock, approached his father with visible concern, and relying on the seriousness of the situation, reported that his sister had run away, leaving them behind. Smiling, the man said that now the girl would be able to enjoy life as she deserved, and this desire for freedom would only contribute to her happiness. A month passed, and the apple once eaten was discarded on the floor, leaving behind only its remains and a small reminder of the time that had passed. Blanche ate fruit after fruit, gradually increasing her level and improving her condition. Each bite brought her closer to new strength and possibilities. The joyful lady, having set foot on the ground, felt deep satisfaction and joy as she had finally reached the place she had long dreamed of and eagerly sought. The city of Digitalius, greeting her with its empty streets covered in dirt and poverty, struck her with its sharp contrast to what the young noblewoman expected to see. Satisfied with her high status, Blanche decided it was time to visit Ricardo to demonstrate her superiority. Having put an elegant hood on her head, the lady confidently walked towards the door, near which hung an old worn sign, as if preserving the memory of bygone times. Covering her nose from the stench, Blanche noted that the original city, which was famous for its filth and vice, was not as terrible as the one that now opened up before her. She suggested that this could be due to the fact that a secret market specializing in selling mysterious products from the dungeons had not yet been established. Suddenly, the aristocrat felt someone's hand rest casually and confidently on her shoulder, and this touch suddenly interrupted her thoughts, causing her heart to beat faster. The man turned out to be an old and ugly man who clearly had no good intentions. His ominous aura and gloomy presence created an atmosphere of anxiety and discomfort. Blanche, unexpectedly grabbing the man's hand, surprised him with her determination and courage, which became an unexpected turn in their meeting. She then twisted his wrist sharply and, pressing his head against the wall, demonstrated her strength and complete control over the situation, making him realize his helplessness. The aristocrat, rudely and with some disdain, confirmed that his words were true. Blanche had indeed never before visited this abandoned and gloomy area in question. After that, with a sweet and unperturbed smile, she added that she could use the help of a guide to navigate this unfamiliar and confusing area. The lady glanced at the man's icon, which had his name, Jack, written in large letters. Next to it, his status as a street scum was prominently displayed. Unwilling to die so easily, the man began to beg for forgiveness. However, Blanche was not going to let her new acquaintance go until he answered all her questions. A sweet girl full of curiosity and anxiety approached the peasant and asked him if he knew where Ricardo, the son of the famous Giotto family, was now. At that moment, the tramp shouted loudly across the hall, attracting the attention of everyone present, and announced with alarm that someone was looking for the boss's eldest son, which caused a wave of whispers and wariness among those gathered. An adult man in an elegant suit and glasses, having carefully looked around those present, asked who the mysterious stranger was who had unexpectedly appeared in their area. The aristocrat proudly declared that she wished to become part of their esteemed family. She expressed a sincere desire to contribute to their lives and become an integral part of their esteemed circle. The man looked with doubt and caution at the strange girl who suddenly appeared, and who could be none other than the henchman of the vile count. With a single snap of the bandits' fingers, their weapons were instantly trained on the little girl standing before them. The tension in the air became almost palpable, and an ominous silence suddenly enveloped the room. Blanche noticed that the Giotto family displayed a distinctly hostile attitude towards her. Cold glances and wariness clearly indicated mistrust and hidden dislike. Disgustedly pushing away the guy who had first approached her, Blanche demonstrated complete disdain and displeasure. The gesture was full of pride and confidence. The girl raised her hands up and said with sincere regret that if she had known that this man was part of their family, she would have treated him completely differently, showing more respect and understanding. The leader of the room noticed the bravery and courage of the stranger, but despite her courage, he emphasized that they did not accept women into their circle. Deciding to demonstrate the full power of her strength, the little lady confidently and effortlessly broke the table by hitting it with her fist. After this, Blanche, with a graceful smile on her lips, curiously inquired about the reason why she was not allowed to become part of the Giotto family, which caused her slight bewilderment. Nodding his head in agreement, the man, radiating confidence and determination, ordered the strong and determined lady to follow him, thereby demonstrating his calm and authority in this situation. The mansion was truly enormous, its scale and architectural sophistication astounding, occupying a vast area and creating a sense of grandeur that was impossible to miss. Looking around, the little girl was surprised that the house did not seem as big to her as it would be in 7 years, when its grandeur and scale would increase significantly. The stranger, comfortably seated in his chair, suddenly attracted attention by loudly and emphatically announcing that the lady had expressed a desire to meet his son. There sat an attractive man with dazzling blonde hair and bright blue eyes, dressed in luxurious clothes that emphasized sophisticated style and elegance. The girl, noticing the status, quickly realized that in front of her sat Ricardo's father, named Ilio Giotto, a man with a high reputation and respect in society. A sad fate awaited this man. 3 years later, when Ricardo turned 18, he himself would strike his father to death using a sword, foreshadowing a tragic event in their future. And already, at the age of 22, this attractive young man intended to take the post of boss, which testified to his ambitious plans and desire for high status. And at the age of 30, having become a villain, he intended to carry out his dark plan, aimed at destroying half the continent, which promised devastating consequences. If Blanche can get close to Ricardo, she will not have to worry about her safety in the midst of the war, as her alliance with him will provide protection and support in difficult times. This way, the girl will have the opportunity to truly enjoy every moment of life, have fun with all her heart, and arrange feasts without any worries, immersing herself in an atmosphere of peaceful existence. After this, the aristocrat planned to set up the man and go over to Anastasia's side, which would allow her to strengthen her position and achieve new profitable goals. Blanche will eventually lead a life of wealth and luxury, enjoying all the privileges and pleasures it has to offer, and immersing herself in a world of comfort and unconditional pleasure. Rising from his seat, Giotto carefully and warmly took the beautiful lady's fragile hand, his gesture filled with sincere attention and deep respect. Ilio could not help but notice that only noble ladies possessed such refined and fragile palms, whose hands were without a single callus, testifying to a life of comfort and without unnecessary difficulties. Grabbing Giotto's hand, the girl reminded him that her desire was not to meet him, but Ricardo, thereby emphasizing her desire to meet a more important person. The bandit leader was struck by the strength and confidence emanating from this small lady, surprised at how her small figure concealed such significant inner strength and determination. Ilio, smiling, said that he could not allow just anyone to meet his child, emphasizing the importance of maintaining certain standards and safety in such meetings. However, Blanche still had a chance to become part of the Giotto family. The bespectacled man, noticing what was happening, quickly headed towards the gentleman to help solve the problem. However, before this, Giotto added that the lady must pass tests to confirm her readiness to become part of the bandit family and earn their trust and respect. Blanche asked if she would really have the opportunity to meet with Ricardo, showing genuine concern and a desire to make sure that her request would be granted. Having received the interlocutor's consent, the girl stated that she would do everything possible to fulfill her part of the agreement, demonstrating determination and a willingness to make every effort to achieve the goal. Night fell, and the estate was plunged into silence, shrouded in a mystical calm, where only the faint light from the windows and soft shadows reminded of the life inside. The young man with blonde hair watched the carriage's arrival intently, his gaze focused and full of anticipation as the luxurious vehicle slowly entered the estate grounds. Blanche emerged from the carriage, wearing a long red dress that exuded elegance and grace. She was accompanied by a man wearing glasses, adding a touch of seriousness and importance to the moment. A member of the Giotto family ordered another person to convey the important news that a gift had been delivered from Silvano to Mr. Mario, emphasizing the importance and formality of this message. Understanding the importance of the assignment, the boy replied that he would immediately complete the task, demonstrating his readiness and responsibility in this matter. The man and the aristocrat remained waiting in the drawing room, where an atmosphere of refined comfort and elegance surrounded them, while the wait continued in an atmosphere of tense anticipation. Blanche, with a slight note of alarm in her voice, asked if this was a test, wanting to understand how seriously they were taking her and what was expected of her in this situation. The subordinate replied that if the girl truly wanted to become a member of their family, she must demonstrate her usefulness and worthiness, confirming that she deserved this status. Another man entered the room and, noticing the unexpected appearance of the guests, was genuinely surprised and amazed. It was Mr. Mario who came to Silvano to find out what surprise he had brought him. This visit was prompted by insatiable curiosity and anticipation, anticipating something special and unexpected. Embracing Blanche, the godfather was clearly pleased with his new gift, which was a beautiful girl, his face expressing joy and deep satisfaction from such a valuable acquisition. Deciding to play along with the situation, the lady waved goodbye to Silvano and said with a smile that they would see each other later, adding a lightness and friendliness to their farewell. Mario added that if such gifts continue, the peace and friendship between their families will last for decades, if not hundreds of years, thus emphasizing the importance of maintaining strong and long-term relationships. The man with glasses was amazed at the lengths Blanche was willing to go to, finding her actions incredibly stupid and thoughtless, which left him feeling perplexed. A handsome blonde-haired man lay in bed, wearing only a robe when a guest entered, adding an unexpected element to his otherwise calm and relaxing vacation. Silvano was shocked by the sight that met his godfather's bedroom. Blanche, in an elegant black dress, towered over the fallen man, her figure casting ominous shadows on the floor. The girl smiled and said that the man was too weak and fragile to cope with the situation, and these words sounded like a cold sentence. She justified herself with a slight smile by saying that the man's neck was too thin, so the head easily turned like a doll's playing in her hands. Silvano, overcome by a wave of anger and embarrassment, barely holding back, a tremor exclaimed with fury in his voice that the maiden had lost her mind and seemed to have completely lost touch with reality. He cursed the lady with fury, because the world they had worked for 2 years to create was destroyed in an instant, like a house of cards under the blow of fate. Blanche stated with icy calm that they had asked her to carry out the task themselves, and now she had brought them the boy's head on a silver platter as promised. Silvano could not calm down, repeating with anxiety that now a war would inevitably begin between them, which would destroy everything that they had built for so long. Blanche calmly asked her subordinate not to worry about such a minor detail, assuring him that the maiden had already taken care of everything and everything was under control. The handsome man, with a hint of bewilderment and slight embarrassment on his face, looked at the lady and, still not understanding the mysterious words, carefully asked what exactly she was talking about and where this conversation was leading. It turned out that Blanche had taken on 50 men single-handedly, demonstrating incredible courage and skill in a difficult fight. The blonde man stood up and approached the little girl with a curious look, asking if she had really defeated all the men single-handedly, which was a sign of incredible courage and strength. Shrugging her shoulders, the little girl quietly replied, with an invisible determination and calmness, that her only desire and wish was to survive at any cost. And therefore the noblewoman stopped at nothing, not allowing anything to block her path. These words evoked nervous laughter from the boy, which unexpectedly turned to tears. He, impressed by the sincerity and gravity of what was said, was unable to contain his emotions. Silvano couldn't calm down, hastily declaring that they should deal with the bodies as quickly as possible and hush up the situation to prevent the possibility of other organizations finding out about what happened and starting a war. The man, with a determined expression, ordered his subordinate to immediately take care of settling all the details in order to avoid further consequences and prevent any unwanted complications. Adjusting his glasses, the worker announced that he would prepare all the necessary evidence and present the deceased Mario as the culprit in the conflict, carefully substantiating his statement and convincing everyone of the correctness of his conclusions. Placing his hand on the lady's shoulder and looking at her with respect, Silvano said that she had done an excellent job of completing a difficult task and expressed his deep appreciation for her outstanding efforts and professionalism. After that, he added that with a girl like her, they would be able to quickly defeat all enemies and overcome any obstacles, confidently looking to the future. The blonde man expressed clear disagreement with these words, declaring that the sweet and fragile Blanche should not have taken part in this matter, considering that her presence here was inappropriate and unfair. Silvano did not understand Elio's words, especially considering that war was about to begin, and felt that the situation required a clearer and more immediate response. With warmth and a slight smile on his lips, Giotto asked Blanche, with genuine interest, whether she had ever had to take someone else's life, demonstrating a deep and genuine curiosity. The aristocrat honestly admitted that this was the first time she had encountered such a situation, and her sincere confession was deeply touching. Silvano could not believe what he heard, and his surprise was so great and deep that he found himself in complete shock, unable to find words to express his feelings and comprehend the scale of what was happening. Elio, looking at the girl with curiosity, asked her about her age, and it turned out that she was 17 years old, but she would soon turn 18. The man quickly came to the conclusion that the lady was only 2 years older than Ricardo, and this discovery was unexpected for him, completely changing his perception of the participant's age and experience. The handsome man gently placed his hand on the girl's head, a gesture expressing his sincere support and deep admiration, which added a special warmth and significance to their moment. Like a caring father, he praised Blanche for her efforts, but at the same time gently warned her not to overexert herself and to pay attention to her own comfort. Smiling brazenly, the girl expressed doubt that the boys would be able to cope without her help, hinting at her indispensability in this situation. Ilio, gently touching his interlocutor's nose with the tip of his finger, with a slight touch of irony and severity, ordered her not to tease him, emphasizing his sincere interest in her behavior. He explained that if they had relied so heavily on a newcomer, their organization would likely not have lasted as long as it did, emphasizing the importance of their team's resilience and self-sufficiency. Silvano agreed with the gentleman, noting that today Blanche had stained her hands with blood for the first time, which signified her extraordinary and disturbing involvement in the events taking place. The girl did not understand such concern because normal people would have been shocked by the sight of murder and could not have remained indifferent to such a terrible event. When the girl reminded them of their meeting with Ricardo, the men fell strangely silent, and a tense silence hung in the air, as if the topic being raised was extremely delicate. Ilio promised to arrange a meeting as soon as the war ended, leaving hope for a peaceful resolution of the conflict and the restoration of all previous relations. Silvano was interested in the reasons for such an insistent desire to meet with the chief's son, trying to understand what was behind this request and what hidden motives might be hidden behind it. The lady admitted that she came to him with the aim of becoming his subordinate, sincerely seeking to offer her services and demonstrate her willingness to work under his leadership. Ilio felt uncomfortable talking about it, but he had to admit that his son was much weaker than the lady, which created additional tension in their interactions. For Blanche, this was not a problem, because she knew that Ricardo planned to change himself and his circumstances in 3 years. And this upcoming change gave her confidence. Silvano offered the girl to become not just a henchman, but the wife of the headman's son, seeing this as an opportunity for her and introducing a new element into their relationship and plans. Moreover, the man added that the boss also had a younger son who was 11 years old, and if Blanche preferred younger ones, then this could be an additional option for her. And if the conversation went in that direction, Silvano expressed a desire to introduce Blanche to other people of the boss, suggesting that this could be an opportunity for a new acquaintance. Away from the adults, in a secluded corner, stood a young boy, his invisible presence giving the impression that he was standing apart, watching the proceedings with motionless attention. The boss's youngest son had blonde hair and bright red eyes, and despite his youth, his expressive gaze was fixed on the stranger, adding a touch of mystery and intrigue to the situation. Leaning over, Blanche met Giulio, the boss's youngest son, and their meeting was filled with tense anticipation, as if this moment could radically change their future interactions. The lady, taking advantage of the moment, asked the boy if he knew where his older brother was, but her question was immediately interrupted, and the conversation took an unexpected direction. Silvano was surrounded by the boys who were going to help guard the Giotto family home. Their presence gave him confidence that security was being ensured. There was a friendly-looking young man with freckles named Tommy, and his warm demeanor immediately attracted attention and created an atmosphere of comfort. Next was a boy with dark hair and deep eyes, whose name was Felice, whose serious look contrasted with the friendly mood of those around him. After him came Cefero, a nice guy, who despite his good looks was known as a mafioso, adding a complex tint to his personal reputation. Suddenly, a loud and insistent voice of the boss came from the window, calling Silvano, informing him that it was time to leave this place and hit the road, as it was time to finish all the business and move on. Before leaving, the man told Blanche in a confident tone that they would definitely cross paths again if he managed to survive and overcome all the difficulties and obstacles that he would encounter along the way. An elegant carriage decorated with graceful patterns slowly rolled along the picturesque streets of the city, immersing passers-by in the atmosphere of bygone times, when luxury and grace were integral companions of city life. Looking out the window, the noblewoman realized with growing alarm that Ricardo was nowhere to be seen, and this discovery forced her to reconsider all her previous plans. The table was filled with delicious dishes, fragrant chicken with a golden crust, and juicy meat awakening not only the appetite, but also a sense of anticipation of a festive feast. Blanche herself, surrounded by young people, was slightly upset that there were only meat dishes on the table, leaving vegetables and salads unattended, which made the lunch less varied and balanced. Turning to Giulio with a slight hint of concern, the lady asked if their elder brother had really once lived with them, trying to dispel any vague doubts. However, before the boy could answer, the silence was suddenly broken by a loud crash of breaking glass, causing everyone present to flinch in surprise. The boy, without losing his composure, quickly ordered everyone to immediately lie down on the floor as a shootout had suddenly begun, and the danger had become real and imminent. Blanche, showing care and compassion, supported the trembling baby, who was completely afraid and confused, trying to calm him down a little in this chaotic moment. Outside, through the window, a loud, alarming cry of people could be heard, in which the mention of a mafia boss, known for his boundless cunning and cruelty, was repeated, causing fear and trembling among everyone around. The man nearby, carefully assessing the situation, quickly counted the number of attackers and came to the conclusion that there were only 14 of them, which allowed him to better plan his further actions. The boys concluded that the attackers had learned of Mario's murder and the conflict that had affected them, which was the reason for such a sudden attack. When the girl raised her hand, declaring that she too could fight, her words were interrupted by a stream of curses from her enemies, who showered Giotto with the latest offensive epithets. The boys were extremely unhappy that the cowardly bastards who had invaded their home behaved like rats, using meanness and unscrupulousness to get into places where no one expected them. Quietly and with deep regret, Blanche admitted her guilt in this attack, realizing that her actions had led to such unpleasant consequences that she was now trying to correct. It turned out that the girl accidentally stepped on the roof of someone else's building while trying to climb higher to find a secluded place to hide from her pursuers. Then, standing on the roof, the lady felt the tiles beneath her feet begin to crumble, along with the wooden boards, creating a feeling of instability and threat. The men could not believe the words of their companion, thinking that it was just a joke or a prank. The story seemed so incredible and amazing to them that they perplexed exchanged glances full of doubt, scratched her head, expressing dissatisfaction, and asked with irritation who exactly had dared to claim that the words were a joke. In her opinion, it was absolutely true. While the workers were unsuccessfully trying to figure out how to deal with the situation, the noblewoman stood up from her seat and decisively declared that she could deal with the attackers herself without needing outside help. The men tried to convince the little lady that her talk of her own abilities was an exaggeration, asking her not to talk nonsense and not to inflate her capabilities to implausible proportions. Suddenly, there was a loud crash, which made the lady and her companions become alert and look around warily in search of the source of the sound. At that moment, all the members of the Ilio family simultaneously turned towards the direction from which the sound was coming, cautiously straining their senses and preparing for a possible threat. Suddenly, footsteps were heard, and black spiders crawled out of the thick darkness, slowly sliding along the fallen boards, each step accompanied by ominous and piercing creaks. Enemies burst into the room, determined to seize everything around them and take revenge, leaving no room for doubt in their intentions. Holding a crossbow in his hand, a handsome man with blonde hair and a cheeky smile addressed Blanche, calling her a beauty with such dazzling charms. A man named Guillermo, who was 19 years old, had 2 of his friends with him, and all 3 were in the room ready to act and support each other in the upcoming clash. The bandit, looking closely at Blanche, asked what she ate to become such a beauty, clearly surprised by her attractiveness and wanting to know the secret of her enchanting appearance. The lady was shocked to learn that the other mafia boss had an impressive 320 morality points, which was an unexpected and surprising contrast to his reputation. The girl asked, with undisguised disbelief, whether the strangers had come with the intention of seizing new territories, since their appearance made her doubt their true motives. The boy laughed, boasting that despite his young age, he had already become the head of the Campano criminal organization. Courage and ambition were clearly visible in his demeanor. Pointing her finger accusingly at the guys, the lady did not hesitate to call them real scoundrels, and the words, full of disdain and condemnation, sounded especially harsh and contemptuous. Blanche, to put it bluntly, stated that they were all far from clean and smelled bad, clearly demonstrating her contempt and displeasure. Guillermo was embarrassed when the maiden came closer and began to talk about filth and dirt. Her words clearly confused him and made him feel uncomfortable. Grabbing the man by the jacket, the noblewoman suggested they go outside and talk, so as not to dirty the house. The offer sounded both confident and demanding. The boy sheepishly asked the stranger to let him go. His voice trembled with excitement and awkwardness as he felt uncomfortable in the current situation. Having tried to threaten the lady, Guillermo stated that he could very well end her life. The harsh words sounded ominous and clearly hinted at the seriousness of his intentions. The system informed him that due to his high moral standards, the boy would not attack the lady. As a result, he agreed to leave on his own 2 feet without offering resistance. When the lady finally let go of Guillermo's jacket collar, the guy turned away, covering his face red with embarrassment, with his hand trying to hide his awkward state. Turning to the boys, the leader asked if they had checked the house, to which they replied that the estate was empty and did not pose any threat. The man, with obvious irritation on his face, shouted what a terrible and heartless person Ilya was, that he left a woman and a child alone in the house, abandoning them to their fate. Suddenly, as if materializing out of thin air, Blanche appeared with cold calm, reminding him that his interlocutor had made the decision to leave the house himself, leaving on his own 2 feet. Awkwardly, and with noticeable agitation, that he had decided to stay a little longer, specifically to be completely sure of the safety of his companion. Suddenly, something so shocking happened that it left the mafia boss trembling with fear. In a panic, he immediately ordered all his subordinates to leave the scene immediately and go to a safe place. The guy, without thinking, rushed forward to protect Blanche with his body from the flying sharp shards of glass, which burst with a loud crack. Guillermo was amazed at how such a large crowd of people had gathered at the scene in just a few minutes, marveling at the speed with which the situation had attracted so many spectators. People outside were indignant, declaring that they were ready to start a real war for the Giotto family if their demands were not met. With irritation, Guillermo noticed how the people from the street were looking at them intently and greedily, with their eyes full of a hungry and angry gleam like predatory wolves ready to pounce at any second and cause trouble. At that moment, the boy, with trepidation and excitement, turned to his older sister, urgently begging her to stop destroying other people's homes and causing suffering to innocent people. Turning to Blanche, the man was amazed and surprised that all these worries and troubles that had just happened were directly connected with this mysterious and fascinating woman. The noblewoman reminded Guillermo that he was planning to leave this place, and this reminder made him deeply realize that the moment for his departure had come, no matter how much he tried to delay it. After this, the guy suggested to the lady that since the situation had gotten so bad, she should leave the house as quickly as possible and go to a safe place before it was too late. The mafia boss turned around and noted with deep disappointment that in our time there were no true gentlemen left who would be embarrassed by causing harm to a lady, and this sight saddened him to the depths of his soul. Turning to face her interlocutor, Blanche firmly and decisively stated that only she had the right to decide what to do and when to do it, not wanting to allow anyone to interfere with her personal decisions. Everyone present froze in anticipation as an elegant lady in an evening gown emerged from the mansion. Her steps were small and refined, lending each movement a special grace and sophistication. In a loud voice, the little girl declared that she had been sent by the Giotto family to make the girl feel guilty for everything that had happened. Her words turned out to be true, revealing the hidden intentions and reasons for Blanche's presence. Locals didn't believe that a fragile little girl could be the culprit and began to get outraged, accusing Ilyo of using a woman as a cover to avoid responsibility. In a loud voice, and in front of everyone present, the girl declared that she had challenged the throne of this city, as this was the only chance for escape and freedom. Together with the boy, the lady rode majestically forward on horseback, her determination obvious. The little girl had challenged the king of this city, and despite his arrogance, he could not afford to reject such a bold and daring challenge. Pressing his ear to his companion Guillermo in a serious and insistent tone, suggested that she take advantage of her last chance and leave this dangerous place while there was still a chance to slip away unnoticed. The boy was convinced that despite the baby's incredible strength and resilience, her efforts would be of no importance since she would still not be able to defeat the king. A large and fat man sat on a throne set up in the middle of the street, his majestic appearance surrounded by guards who tirelessly guarded him, ensuring the complete safety and protection of his owner. The grown man, who was evidently enjoying his food, suddenly let out a loud and tense cry, full of anger and indignation, asking who dared to challenge him so impudently. Seeing the fragile Blanche, the fat man was amazed and surprised that this gentle young lady dared to disturb the peace and issue a call to battle, causing him deep bewilderment. The boar mockingly said that perhaps the fragile maiden had made a mistake, and that instead of becoming a rival in the ring, she should have become his partner in bed. The girl couldn't help but notice that the man possessed outstanding endurance and impressive strength, which became more and more obvious as he moved forward. Thanks to the magic bracelet, the lady's strength increased significantly, becoming much more impressive compared to what it was at the very beginning of her journey. A piece of apple suddenly fell and ended up right at the lady's feet, which made her look at the accidentally fallen fruit. The benevolent man generously gave the lady the opportunity to refuse the battle for beauty, allowing her to avoid conflict and maintain her dignity. Amerigo gave the wisdom that one should not engage in battle with an enemy who is clearly superior to oneself, for wisdom lies in the ability to avoid unequal battles. Blanche did not object to the fact that her opponent was significantly stronger, realizing that trying to dispute this would be futile. However, the little girl was intrigued by where exactly Amerigo got these apples, which aroused her keen interest and many questions. The man, thinking that the lady might be craving some fruit, remarked that he could provide her with some if she were more kind and welcoming. When the little girl began opening her inventory and moving her hand in the air, her opponent couldn't understand what exactly she was doing and how it could affect their interaction. Amerigo ordered the lady to immediately stop her stupidity and senseless actions, which only hindered the matter, and after that, they finally began the long-awaited battle. The opponents stood before each other, ready to fight. Their eyes met, and the tension grew, creating a tense atmosphere before the start of a brutal fight. Blanche swung determined and purposeful, preparing to deliver the first blow. Her movements were full of tense power and confidence, every muscle in her body ready for action, radiating determination and focus. Amerigo was stunned when a powerful blow from the maiden hit him in the stomach, and suddenly blood appeared on his body. What happened shocked him, and he froze, not expecting such a turn of events. When Blanche extended her hand, it was covered in a bright red liquid, indicating that the blow was not only accurate, but also bloody. People watched in shock, like spectators in the stands, powerless to intervene or change the course of events, their faces reflecting a mixture of surprise and helplessness. The guards were astonished to see that someone had managed to defeat the master, their faces expressing a mixture of shock and disbelief, as such an event was completely unexpected and unbelievable for them. The lady asked if the people nearby were members of the Maella family, her voice laced with concern and interest as she tried to find out if they were related to people important to her. The little girl asked curiously where exactly they got the apples, her big eyes sparkling with interest, and her question was full of anticipation and a desire to know the details. The men, trembling with fear, pointed with trepidation to the majestic greenhouse, where amidst the greenery and silence, powerful trees rose up like guardians of a secret. The large house, as if it had absorbed warmth and light, was flooded with rays of sunlight that gently glided along its walls, giving it even more grandeur and comfort. While enjoying the juicy apples she had harvested in honor of her well-deserved victory, Blanche unexpectedly received notice that her reputation had increased significantly. Soon, a young man approached her, his voice filled with both interest and concern, as he asked if the lady had really been able to kill Amerigo and win such a decisive battle. Elio and Silvano were deeply shocked and surprised by what they heard. Their faces expressed genuine amazement, since the news was so unexpected and incredible. Guillermo stood up for the girl, now addressing her with reverence and respect, as if she were a queen, emphasizing her importance and greatness in his eyes. Giotto, not recognizing the boy as a member of his family, curiously asked who he was and how he was connected to them, since such a presence was unexpected and mysterious to him. With a grin, the boy declared that at 19 he was a mafia boss, and now he occupied the position of Blanche's right hand, demonstrating his influence and importance in his circle. Elio sighed wearily and realized that the guy in question was involved in mushroom smuggling, which explained his strange behavior and secrecy. Looking questioningly at her interlocutor, the maiden asked if he had said anything about mushrooms used in argot, trying to understand whether the interlocutor had meant something specific or whether it was just a casual mention. The man hastened to explain that the boy had spoken frankly and openly, and that the conversation had been specifically about smuggling in order to dispel any doubts and misunderstandings. This came as a complete surprise to the aristocrat, as Guillermo was known for his high moral standards and impeccable behavior, which made his actions especially surprising and incomprehensible. The boy could not restrain himself, and with contempt in his voice, ordered the rich people not to look down on him, expressing his deep contempt for their arrogant behavior and social arrogance. Guillermo cursed, expressing his outrage and resentment, as he said that evil men had monopolized their entire city, seizing its resources and power. Just as the conversation in the company became particularly tense, it was interrupted by a voice that, addressing Blanche with respect and reverence, called her Her Majesty, thereby reminding everyone of her high status and merits. These were bandits who, having lost their king, now sought to make the lady their queen, hoping in this way to restore their influence and power under new leadership. Silvano quietly informed his boss that all the property had now passed to the beauty, thereby emphasizing that the little girl had become the new owner and possessor of significant assets. Ilio understood that the point was that these people were going to do everything possible to make Blanche part of their family, thus trying to strengthen their position. Soon the boys simultaneously turned to the aristocrat, who was quietly eating an apple, and asked what she was going to do now, waiting for her decision and reaction to the current situation. In response, Blanche said that she had no intention of becoming part of Miele, as her true goal was to become Ricardo's subordinate, thereby seeking to realize her own ambitions. However, this did not mean that the girl was not going to take the property she had won, which she needed for one important matter related to her future plans. Sitting on the throne in front of the excited crowd, the lady held a crown in her hands, symbolizing her new power and greatness, and her gaze radiated confidence and determination. The little girl already knew that the residents were unhappy with what had happened some time ago, and she realized how much this unrest could affect the city. After much deliberation and careful consideration of all the circumstances, Blanche finally decided that she was punishing the Giotto family in an effort to restore justice and redress grievances. With a sinister grin on her face, the lady, full of malicious pleasure, announced that they intended to set fire to Ilio's house in exactly 2 days, fomenting fear and destruction in anticipation of their wicked plan. Silvano was extremely displeased with this turn of events, declaring that the aristocrat had completely gone mad, displaying unimaginable madness and violating all boundaries of reason. Blanche continued saying with cold stubbornness that right now she intended to uncover the hidden treasures of the Miele family, demonstrating determination and confidence. With a wicked grin, the girl added that she wanted to see everything descend into chaos and destruction. The noblewoman declared that people could take whatever they wanted from the hidden wealth, stealing and taking from each other, enjoying the lawlessness. The fire blazed relentlessly, engulfing the house with relentless fury, and burning it down, leaving only ashes and charred remains as grim evidence of its destructive wrath. Silvano watched the destruction from his window, barely holding back his tears, his soul filled with deep grief and hopelessness as the fire inexorably consumed everything that was dear and meaningful to him. Smiling with a wry glint, Guillermo said that the fools focused all their attention on the treasure, not noticing that the real dangers and opportunities lay beyond their narrow vision. Unable to contain his emotions, the boy began to enthusiastically praise the girl, who was not only amazingly strong, but also unusually beautiful, possessing incredible qualities. After her shower, Blanche listened attentively to Silvano's words as he expressed his dissatisfaction with the fire in the mansion, clearly disappointed that his expectations had not been met. The lady hastened to explain that such measures were absolutely necessary in order to calm and pacify the heated crowd, satisfy their demands, and prevent further unrest and disturbance. This explanation failed to calm the bespectacled subordinate, who was convinced that Blanche was the culprit of all the problems. Discontent and irritation continued to mount, despite the lady's attempts to justify her actions. The lady's answer was dry and unperturbed. The Screws family's house simply had hot water, and that was enough to calm everyone down, despite the obvious discontent. This did not satisfy only Silvano, while Guillermo, on Blanche's orders, was sent to go and take a shower to freshen up and tidy himself up. After listening to the lady, the guy headed for the door without delay, deciding to immediately follow the instructions and leave the room in order to follow her orders and not cause further complaints. Ilio, remaining close to the lady, carefully asked for the opportunity to talk, seeking to discuss important issues in a private setting where everything could be discussed in more detail and without interruption. The room was richly decorated with luxurious decorative elements and exquisite furniture, creating an atmosphere of refined nobility and elegance that was striking in its grace and comfort. Finally, the lady learned that Ricardo had been held captive by the evil count all this time, which was unexpected and alarming news for her, causing her heart to beat faster with excitement and anxiety. It turned out that 10 years ago, Juan took out a large loan from a mafia boss to start a business and never repaid it, which now greatly complicated the situation and raised many problems. 2 months ago, Ricardo set out to repay the principal and interest, but was unable to complete the task, failing to repay the money and ending up in the aristocrat's captivity. Although Ilio promised a generous reward for saving his son, no one was able to fulfill this promise and return the boy, which left the problem unresolved and worsened an already difficult situations. The man didn't even know if the child was alive, and this uncertainty only increased his anxiety and worry, creating a gloomy atmosphere of uncertainty. The girl tried to cheer up the boss, assuring him that Ricardo was not someone who was easy to defeat, and that his strength and determination made him an insurmountable opponent under any circumstances. Giotto suggested that the lady take responsibility for saving the guy herself, thereby automatically becoming a subordinate and accepting all the obligations associated with it. The little girl honestly admitted that she was not particularly eager to fulfill this offer. Her words reflected her doubts and lack of enthusiasm about the proposed role. Perplexed, the mafia boss asked why she had refused the offer, trying to understand the reasons for her doubts and reluctance to carry out the assigned task, and to understand what could have caused such a decision. The girl replied that she simply had no desire to carry out this task, and having finished the conversation, she stepped aside. Ilio, completely perplexed and with many questions, Giotto reflected that it is impossible to effectively manage an organization when one of the subordinates acts on his own discretion and ignores orders, violating discipline and creating chaos in the structure. Coldly and decisively, the man stated that in that case, the girl would no longer be considered a member of the Giotto family, emphasizing that her actions had led to a loss of status and trust. These words stopped the lady, and she immediately turned towards the mafioso, ready to take the necessary measures and rethink her position in light of the new circumstances. After this, Ilio added that Blanche already knew how to get back, implying that she had a plan to restore her position and eliminate the problems that had arisen. The man didn't care whether the maiden greeted Ricardo or not. Leaving such a strange and unpredictable girl in the organization was too dangerous, as instability could seriously threaten internal order and security. Blanche lost her carefree nature, becoming stern and immersed in serious thoughts that replaced her former lightness and distinctive trait. A new day had dawned outside, and the white estate shone in the rays of morning light, a symbol of freshness and the beginning of something beautiful, filling the surrounding atmosphere with a sense of new hope and harmony. Silvano could not comprehend that the lady who had always seemed the embodiment of nobility had decided to leave the family, calling Ilio a fool and breaking all previous ties that had seemed unshakable. Blanche was surprised to notice that she didn't immediately recognize the guy who passed her. He had changed so much that he now looked much more attractive and confident than before. Furthermore, the lady stopped the loud voice that kept calling her as a sister and asked her to wait so that she could first sort out the current situation and settle all the issues that had arisen. It turned out that it was Giulio, standing not far from Blanche and attracting everyone's attention with his eccentric behavior, which could not go unnoticed. The boy held out the gift with trepidation. An exquisite necklace, gracefully adorned with a miniature elephant figurine, symbolizing good luck and prosperity. Giulio explained that if the little girl showed this amulet to her brother, he would be sure that the lady belonged to the noble Giotto family, known for its history and influence. Silvano happily handed over his gift, which was carefully wrapped and radiated special warmth and attention to detail, demonstrating a sincere desire to make this moment special and memorable. It was a sticker portrait that could prove quite useful if a lady were faced with the need to hide her identity, as it had the unique ability to easily adapt to different images. Blanche was wearing an exquisite cape, which not only added a special charm and elegance to her look, but also warmed her from the cold, creating a cozy and warm atmosphere. Guillermo asked his queen to always stay warm and comfortable, emphasizing that comfort and safety are of paramount importance to him, and the guy is ready to do everything to make her feel protected and loved. In response, the little girl said that if fate was kind to them, they would still be able to meet and spend time together, despite all the obstacles and difficulties that might stand in their way. The aristocrat was well aware that after being expelled from the family, she could become an enemy for Ricardo, which was absolutely unacceptable, and she was determined to avoid this at any cost. Under cover of night, the mansion was shrouded in thick darkness, its majestic walls hidden in shadow, creating an atmosphere of mystery and intrigue that captured attention and aroused curiosity. The maids passing through the corridors expressed their regret for Madame Mariette. Her difficult situation and suffering aroused in them sincere sympathy and concern. However, the grief did not last long, as soon after the wedding, the maids received new assignments, which brought them new opportunities and prospects. The freckled maid turned to her coworker and gruffly reminded her that she too should express gratitude for the work she had done, emphasizing the importance of acknowledging efforts and showing respect. Their friend's name was Irene, but in reality, she was Blanche, carefully hiding her true face under an ugly mask so as not to arouse suspicion in others. The maids immediately realized that the strict Madame Mariette would be very angry to see such an ugly woman, and that this would cause a storm of emotions and discontent in hers. Smiling, Irene offered to take the food to the guards in the basement so that they wouldn't have to worry about food and could focus on their work. One of the maids asked in bewilderment why it was necessary to go into the basement where almost no one goes, and this caused some confusion and additional questions among everyone. They accepted their friend's words that she wanted to bring the prisoner medicine, although in reality the girl should have taken better care of herself. Irene listened silently, as she was ordered to follow only clear instructions, without unnecessary questions or explanations, accepting it as inevitable and strict requirements. Last night, Blanche easily snuck into the dungeon by slipping sleeping pills into the guard's food to ensure her freedom of action and the ability to carry out her plan without interference. The lady walked past the sleeping man without causing him any harm and trying not to disturb the silence around. The aristocrat grabbed the bars and called out Ricardo's name. The voice rang out in the dark silence, as if calling out to him from the depths of the night, but he did not respond. It was only when Blanche gently touched his black hair that her attention was drawn, and he finally turned his gaze to the guest, aware of the little girl's presence in this gloomy place. However, instead of understanding the other person's intentions, the boy moved away from the lady, in fear, screaming for her to move away immediately and not hurt him. While the maid was scolding her partner, she was deeply thinking about the failure of her plan due to the loud scream of the guy, which attracted unwanted attention and ruined everything. Throwing the clothes onto Blanche with obvious disdain, the lady abruptly declared that if she did not manage to wash Mariette's dress on time, she would be left without food, forcing her to make a tough choice. Another maid was worried about whether their partner was okay, and she tried with persistent concern to find out if everything was okay, and if the poor thing needed help. These were good girls who were genuinely concerned about the new servants at the estate, and kindly shared their bread with her, showing care and support. Brushing aside their anxious questions and trying to remain calm, Irene confidently stated that everything was fine, despite her inner doubts, thereby reassuring those around her. Phoebe and Agate were deeply touched by their friend's morality, her nobility, which made them see in her an example of true humanity. But Blanche did not eat the stale bread, for she had large stocks of soup and fresh apples, which she preferred to use instead. Smiling sweetly, the girl asked not to be delayed and to continue her work without her, since she needed to go about her important business, leaving everyone to calmly do their tasks. Dressed in a beautiful pink-patterned dress, Blanche headed into the basement, her outfit contrasting with the dark atmosphere of the place, creating a bright accent in the gloomy surroundings. The guard immediately reacted to the night visitor, warily asking who exactly was in the basement and what brought him to this place at such a late hour. He quickly recognized the stranger as Madame Mariette, who had urgent business. The lady dismissed the guard so that she could resolve her issues in peace. The man could not help but obey his mistress, and silently handed her the keys, realizing the importance of the urgent matter and the need for impeccable adherence to strict orders. When the guard left, Blanche walked up to the bars, quietly opened the cage leading to the prisoner's quarters, and with determination and caution, entered inside, preparing for an important stage of her carefully thought-out plan. Quietly, with aristocratic grace, she pronounced the name Ricardo, as if each syllable were a precious stone that illuminated her silent surroundings, with a soft light bringing a touch of elegance to the atmosphere. The boy, seriously wounded, sat on the bed, paying no attention to the light shining through the curtains, nor to the night visitor who entered the room with quiet steps without showing the slightest sign of interest. With the soft light filling the room, Blanche could not help but notice Ricardo's exceptional beauty, which was truly captivating. Looking at the guy's status, the lady realized that his stress level was surprisingly high, reaching 999 units. This number indicated deep emotional tension and a complex internal state. Without thinking twice, the aristocrat took out her special lantern and used the item to slightly reduce the stress level of the boy, who found himself in such a difficult situation. Slowly, the stress level began to decrease, and the guy, as if awakening from a deep state, asked who this mysterious lady was, who showed such concern for him. Approaching the wounded man, Blanche introduced herself with confident grace, saying her name with sincerity and respect, hoping it would help establish rapport and instill in him the trust necessary for further interaction. After this, the lady slowly and with special trepidation took out from her handbag an exquisite pendant, which she had come to give to him, holding it out with the hope that this gift would become a symbol of their mutual understanding. Tears welled up in Ricardo's eyes as he saw the small elephant figurine in front of him, bringing back touching memories and evoking deep emotions. The man was so overwhelmed with happiness that he couldn't hold back his tears when he realized that Elio had indeed sent the one who became his savior and brought hope in a difficult moment. Crying with deep emotion, the boy demanded that the lady immediately remove the shackles that bound him and allow him to regain his freedom and relief. Seeing a simple bunch of keys in the hands of his savior, Ricardo fell into despair, realizing that these keys would not work for his release. Only Giacomo held the key to saving the boy. Not understanding who exactly was being talked about, Blanche, with obvious interest and persistence, asked who this man was in order to clarify his role in current events and understand what significance he had for everything that was happening. Quietly, almost in a whisper, Ricardo muttered that this man was the evil count's right hand, a faithful assistant about whom the darkest rumors circulated. This bearded man was a true sadist. His presence evoked such fear and horror that even the bravest people preferred to avoid the villain so as not to become victims of cruelty. Covering his face with his hands, Ricardo confessed that Giacomo often came to cruelly punish the boy, leaving him in constant fear and suffering. Suddenly, the lady interrupted the guy's speech, declaring that she did not have time for long listening and that she must immediately get down to her business. This caused such a storm of emotions in the handsome man that his face was flooded with tears of shock, as if an unexpected wave of shock had washed away his fragile composure. Grabbing Blanche by the hand, he begged her not to leave, addressing the sweet aristocrat with hope and anxiety in his voice, as if his whole life depended on this decision to stay. Ricardo confessed that he no longer wanted to be alone. His body trembled with deep melancholy and fear of loneliness, which seemed unbearable. The beauty calmly replied that she had no intention of leaving, especially without the mafia boss's son, whose status and influence clearly gave her words additional significance and weight. The girl, tightly gripping the handcuffs that held the boy, acted with determination and confidence, as if she knew that it was she who would have to change the current situation and help him get out of this predicament. The metal handcuffs, broken by Blanche's force, fell to the floor with a dull thud, leaving behind a trail of broken chain and shattered strength. In complete shock, Ricardo, not believing his own eyes, stared at his freed hands, as if he could not believe the reality of what had happened and the miracle that had just happened. With a tender smile, the aristocrat remarked that the boy had evidently endured many hardships and sufferings. Her words were full of sympathy and understanding for the young tester of fate. Suddenly, the system reported that Ricardo's stress level had begun to rise again, signaling the growing tension and anxiety that had once again gripped the mafioso. The girl froze in place, realizing that her innocent joke had hurt her interlocutor, and her face lit up with remorse, understanding the seriousness of the situation. Concerned, and with a slight tremor in her voice, Blanche carefully asked if Ricardo would be able to get to his feet, given that he was weakened and clearly had difficulty moving. The boy tried to get up, but soon fell to the floor again, and the lady, sighing with slight regret, told him to take his time and gather his strength to try again. This frightened the boy even more, who, fearing the arrival of Giacomo, realized that all this time he had been suffering bullying from the assistant of the evil count. Blanche felt genuinely sorry for the poor boy, who was afraid of everything, and whose anxiety level was extremely high, as if a reflection of her own fears long ago, when she herself was in the same position. Placing her hand on her new acquaintance's shoulder, the maiden tried to calm the young man, showing sincere kindness and support to help him cope with his excitement and anxiety. She promised that she would not allow Giacomo to harm Riccardo, assuring him that she would protect him from any dangerous interference and evil intentions. Their hands touched, and Blanche, looking into his eyes, swore on her name, her fidelity and devotion to the guy, promising to support and protect him from any threats. As if out of nowhere, a plate of food appeared in front of them, as if it had materialized out of thin air, bringing with it a feeling of unexpected and pleasant surprise. Blanche kindly asked the hungry Riccardo if he liked the pork trotter soup, showing concern and a desire to treat him to something tasty and filling. Outside, a blanket of snow lay quietly and peacefully, covering the ground, creating a winter fairy tale of snow-white expanses and sparkling ice crystals. The maids whispered among themselves, expressing dissatisfaction with the new girl, who looked strange and did not fit into their usual circle of acquaintances and usual activities. Irene thought that getting rid of Giacomo would significantly reduce Riccardo's stress levels, believing that removing the source of his anxiety would help him calm down and recover. Suddenly, an unpleasant voice interrupted her thoughts abruptly, distracting the girl from the flow of thoughts and returning her to reality with unexpected and overwhelming force. The Marquis emerged into the street, gun in hand, and walked swiftly towards the servants. His confident steps and determined demeanor clearly showed that he was serious. The blonde-haired maid began to justify herself, explaining that she was simply educating the new girl, trying to convince the Marquise that her actions were only part of her job and had no malicious intent. The man immediately turned his attention to Blanche, who at that moment turned away, trying to hide her awkwardness and avoid looking directly at him. The nobleman could not help but notice the striking resemblance between the maid and his runaway daughter, which attracted attention and caused a wave of memories and emotions. However, Juan soon appeared, turning to his father-in-law with obvious concern, asking if there had been any problems with the servants. His voice betrayed anxiety and a desire to sort out the situation. The Marquis immediately lost hope and admitted that he had simply remembered his late daughter, which had brought back painful memories and broken his resolve. The Count realized that, seeing a servant similar in age to the deceased, the aristocrat experienced deep sadness and melancholy caused by the sad memory of loss. Without much thought, Juan announced that all 3 maids had been fired, thus deciding to resolve the problem and stop any further misunderstandings. Turning to Giacomo, the Count ordered that the poor girl who had been offended be taken care of in order to ease her father-in-law's sorrow and avoid further unpleasant emotions. For Blanche, this was a pleasant surprise, because she finally learned the identity of the villain who dared to offend Riccardo, which allowed her to see his true face and understand who was behind the suffering. Juan himself ordered the Marquis to stop thinking about the dead and focus on the living Mariette, who was beautiful and deserved more attention and care. With a smile, the nobleman reminded the aristocrat of the upcoming wedding ceremony, which was to take place very soon, and that he should focus on preparing for this important event. Blanche was extremely pleased that, as Giacomo's personal assistant, it was not difficult for her to get to him and carry out her carefully thought-out plan of revenge. The only thing she continued to think about until now was how exactly she should finish off this disgusting man in order to get rid of his abomination once and for all. Riccardo lay comfortably on the bed, covered with a soft sheet, feeling completely satisfied after a hearty dinner, the taste of which still lingered on his tongue, evoking pleasant sensations and peace. The boy thoughtfully rubbed his hands, just freed from the heavy chains, feeling the long-awaited freedom and deliverance from the torment that he had endured with great difficulty. During his punishments, Giacomo often called Riccardo by his father's name and ordered him to look at himself in order to emphasize his superiority and humiliate the young man. Riccardo still could not get rid of the painful memories that, like shadows, brought fear and horror upon him, haunting him even in the calmest moments and not allowing him to find inner peace. The only consolation for the young man was the promise of protection from Blanche, which at the same time caused him a feeling of embarrassment and relief, giving him hope of safety. Suddenly, the figure of a lovely aristocratic woman appeared before him, holding a lantern in her hand. Her dazzling and captivating beauty filled the air with an atmosphere of mysterious enchantment. She slowly approached Ricardo. Her feminine movements were graceful and fluid, adding mystery and charm to the incredible image. Immersed in the dark memories of a bloody battle that took not only his peace but also a piece of his heart, the boy lost himself in deep thoughts about how this tragic event had radically changed his whole life. A frustrated Juan listened to a report from an assistant who said that all 5 of Mariette's maids of honor had resigned, unable to cope with the workload before the wedding and the difficult character of their mistress. The Count was not happy that his future wife would walk down the aisle without a servant, as this could significantly undermine the man's reputation and create an undesirable public image. When the conversation turned to candidates for the position of maid of honor, the subordinate suddenly remembered one girl who seemed the ideal choice for the role given her outstanding qualities and suitability for the requirements. Mariette could not contain her deep dislike when she saw the new maid of honor, and her face immediately betrayed strong discontent and irritation, which was difficult to hide even behind a carefully concealed mask of politeness. Irene stood nearby, her face disfigured and deformed, which only heightened the feeling of discomfort and tension in the air. Every glance at her distorted appearance generated a continuous feeling of anxiety and confusion. The older maid explained to her mistress that she had been sent on behalf of the Count's assistant, adding details to clarify the situation and eliminate any misunderstandings. Blanche sighed heavily, not wanting to delve into the analysis and deal with the bad mood of the stupid Mariette, preferring to avoid a new conflict. The once older sister approached the younger one, extending her hand towards her and expressing something vague that could be perceived as a desire for acceptance. The lady was completely satisfied with the fact that next to such a monster, she would seem even more beautiful, and this added to her confidence in her unique attractiveness. To confirm her words, the aristocrat turned to her younger brother, who was absorbed in his studies, and attracted his attention to reinforce her words and demonstrate her rightness. However, Alphonse took the maid's side, noting that it was probably unpleasant for her to hear insults addressed to her, and expressed his sympathy for her difficult situation. Staring ahead with empty eyes, the boy remembered how Mariette had insulted Blanche in the same way, and his gaze filled with bitterness and regret from these memories. Having prevailed over her brother, the aristocrat ordered that this name should never be spoken again, deciding that it should not be spoken in her presence and should not darken good days. The Marquise entered the room just as Mariette began insulting her former sister, which only added to the tension and drew his attention to the conflict. Upon noticing her father's arrival, the lady's anger immediately turned to profound sadness. Her face immediately took on an expression of sorrow, and she began to cry, unable to hide her sudden pain and disappointment. The nobleman noticed the scarred maid who now served his daughter, and noted with great interest that this appearance reminded him of Blanche. This parallel image evoked a strange and fascinating sensation. The other members of the family could not help but notice the familiar voice that belonged to the lady, and this voice evoked memories and surprise in them, as it was well known to them. The man was quick to condemn his living daughter for daring to compare Blanche to a maid, declaring that the younger girl had long been dead and did not deserve such comparisons. The beautiful noblewoman herself blamed her father for letting the girl go so easily and immediately arranging a wedding for Mariette, considering this an unfair and unworthy approach. Irene watched her former family quarrel with a hidden satisfaction, for the hatred she felt for them was great, and she enjoyed their suffering and conflict. The father strictly ordered his daughter to forget about all unnecessary and insignificant things, strongly advising her to focus on preparing for the wedding, emphasizing the importance of complete immersion in this process, and eliminating all distractions. This caused Mariette deep disgust, since the thought of becoming the wife of a terrible count who inspired terror caused her deep disappointment and depression. In this case, the Marquis ordered his relatives to make every effort to regain the favor of the third prince, realizing that restoring his sympathies was vital for further plans and strengthening their position. This upset Mariette, who angrily ordered that the scoundrel not be mentioned again, feeling deep dissatisfaction and disgust at the situation that put her in an awkward position. Blanche had known from the very beginning that this relationship would sooner or later lead to a rift between the sisters. When suddenly she noticed her younger brother's gaze, which was full of attentive interest and deep concern. The boy, with obvious interest and some excitement, asked if the maid's name was Irene, trying to find out if this name coincided with one he had once heard or known. Alphonse ordered the servant to go out and take a walk, leaving Blanche alone. She had no choice but to agree, playing her part and trying to maintain her calm. The two of them moved slowly through the cold and gloomy corridors of the mansion, where each of their steps echoed off the empty walls, creating an atmosphere of solitude and mystery that was enhanced by the silence around them. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, Giacomo appeared, joyfully greeting the young gentleman with a warm smile and genuine enthusiasm that unexpectedly brought the space around to life. Watching from the sidelines, the conversation between her brother and the Count's servant Blanche wondered why the latter had so much free time and how this might be related to his duties. Upset, Blanche realized that if this man appeared in front of Ricardo, it could ruin everything and destroy everything that the little girl had strived for and worked for so long. A boy in prison was startled by a noise that set off alarm bells in him, causing his heart to beat faster and leaving him uncertain about what might happen next. Biting his finger, he trembled under the blanket, trying to contain his fear and not reveal the state of anxiety and excitement that had gripped him at that moment. Frightened and worried, Ricardo was worried in his heart that Giacomo had come again to hurt him as he had before. But instead of experiencing torment, the young man met the sweet lady who had previously freed him from his shackles, and now he found himself under her kind and considerate influence. In complete surprise and delight, the boy suddenly cried out, threw the blanket aside, and with a trembling voice pronounced the name of his savior, radiating sincere gratitude. Before Blanche could ask about the health of the mafia boss's son, the boss himself rushed towards the lady with obvious concern, wanting to make sure that she was not just a dream. The boy's affectionate embrace of the lady caused her to feel slightly embarrassed, which was reflected in her flushed cheeks, and the noblewoman felt tenderness and warmth from this unexpected gesture. A sincere and contented smile appeared on the young man's lips, reflecting his inner happiness and satisfaction from the moment that had just happened. With tears in his eyes, the boy confessed with trepidation that he had awaited the arrival of his savior with great impatience and deep emotion. His words were filled with a sincere feeling of gratitude and relief. Blanche politely, and with genuine concern, inquired about Ricardo's well-being, expressing her concern and desire to know how he was feeling after what had happened to make sure that everything was okay. Like a faithful servant, the boy reported that he felt fine and was ready to escape at any moment, demonstrating his complete readiness and vigilance. The lady did not share this opinion, as she believed that the guy's endurance still left much to be desired and was insufficient to cope with the current difficulties. While the young man was embarrassed, the aristocrat remembered that she had the same endurance back when she was just starting out and was at level 1. Seeing his companion's bad mood, Ricardo suggested that they set up the lantern together, hoping that working together would lift her spirits and bring a little comfort. The aristocrat refused, explaining that the lamp could only be used 5 more times, and it would be wiser to save the item for extreme cases when its use would become truly necessary. Ricardo stared sadly at the dimly glowing lantern, his gaze filled with melancholy and reflecting an inner sadness, as if he was seeking solace in this humble source of light. Embarrassed, the guy confessed to the girl that if the remaining amount of light was quickly depleted, they should spend this time together to enjoy the moment and make it special. Blanche could not refuse the young man's request, and therefore, with tenderness and understanding, she sat down on the bed to spend this time with him and support him in the moment that was important to him. Trying not to stutter and hiding his excitement, Ricardo asked the girl what she had been doing all this time. The male voice betrayed an insistent desire to know about her life. The lady modestly replied that she had a lot to do, and showing genuine concern, asked a counter-question, wondering whether the guard had put too much pressure on the prisoner and created unnecessary difficulties. With joy on his face, the boy replied that neither the guards nor Giacomo had come to him, and this brought him great relief and a feeling of freedom. The guy listened fascinated to his companion's story about how she secretly tore out half the pages of an accounting book containing percentages and burned them, easing her mental state. Giacomo's behavior, which consisted of nothing but beating around the bush all day came as a real surprise to Blanche. He flaunted jewelry and treasures in front of the Marquise's youngest son, as if looking for a way to attract his attention. Ricardo was about to say a few words, but when he noticed how his speech might be received, embarrassment overcame him, and he, blushing, stood frozen in silence. It turned out that the guy finally remembered why he came to the Count after such a long time spent in thought and uncertainty. Quietly, with naive interest, the boy asked if the Giotto family had lost the war, hoping that perhaps they had managed to retain their influence and dignity. The surprised lady watched with genuine interest as Ricardo, in deep self-condemnation, reproached himself for his inability to obtain money, placing all the blame for the current situation entirely on himself. As a friend, the girl recalled the original story in which the guy set out on a journey to repay a debt which helped her better understand his motives and behavior. Ricardo considered himself a laughingstock for failing to repay his own family, which was perceived as a major failure and a huge shame for life. Turning away from the noblewoman, he felt deep shame and humiliation for not being able to escape from prison on his own, and this realization only intensified his inner suffering and sense of helplessness. As soon as the guy suddenly stopped, the mafioso heard from the lady a decisive statement that he was absolutely wrong, and it sounded like a bolt from the blue. The lady hastened to reassure her interlocutor, gently assuring him that despite the current difficulties and setbacks, he would ultimately still receive the money and would be able to cope with the situation, turning it to his advantage. Blanche sincerely dreamed of emptying the Count's treasury, leaving not a single jewel in it, and with the greatest satisfaction of hitting Ilio in the face with a bag of gold to express all her deep rage and disappointment. Moreover, the good news was that if Juan was left without money, then the Marquise's family would also be left without finances, which could significantly change their situation and make adjustments to their current plans. The sweet girl herself will be able to literally bathe in gold coins, enjoying the luxury and prosperity that will now be available to her. The most important thing is that spring is about to arrive, and with its arrival, hidden dungeons will begin to appear in various corners of the earth, where ancient monasteries once lived, full of unknown secrets and forgotten mysteries. Blanche intended to turn the Giotto family into an army of helpers who would aid her in the battle against monsters, using their resources and powers to achieve her goal. Suddenly, tearing the aristocrat out of her fantasy world, Ricardo's voice rang out, asking with genuine interest if the lady was cold. The man, noticing that his companion might be cold, showed concern and offered her his blanket to provide her with warmth and comfort, demonstrating his attention and willingness to help. What happened embarrassed the guy so much that he blushed with shame and didn't know what to do with himself, trying to hide his embarrassment and find a way out of the awkward situation. Smiling, Blanche took a bowl of soup from her inventory and offered it to the young man as food, demonstrating her willingness to take care of his comfort and satisfaction. As Ricardo savored the taste of the food, he felt a cozy warmth begin to spread throughout his body, and the feeling of comfort and coziness it brought gave him deep satisfaction and peace. Phoebe and Agate, two kind maids, sincerely and happily thanked their friend for helping them find a new job, expressing deep appreciation for her support and care. Irene said it was a small thing, thereby expressing her modest attitude towards help, and emphasizing that for her, it did not represent a significant problem. From a conversation with the maids, Blanche learned that Juan had given a copy of the keys to the treasury to his faithful assistant, which opened up new prospects for cunning plans and strategies. This news turned out to be very pleasant for the girl, as it made it easier to carry out her plans, adding confidence in future plans and actions. At this time, Juan was indignant because he discovered that half of the accounting book was missing just before the wedding, which caused him deep dissatisfaction and concern, aggravating the current problems. Giacomo couldn't help but notice how suspicious the situation looked. His attention was drawn to the strange circumstances, which made him wary and doubtful. With a smirk, the evil man stated that it might be worthwhile to conduct a check on the new maid Irene, hinting at possible problems or suspicions that might have arisen regarding her. Pierre, accompanied by a priest, came to support Mariette ahead of tomorrow's wedding, trying to make sure the noblewoman felt calm and confident before this important event in her life. The girl was clearly irritated and extremely unhappy with what was happening, and next to her, as if immersed in her own thoughts, Blanche stood quietly and restrained, carefully observing the situation. When the guy, noticing her mood, carefully asked if his younger sister was angry with him, the lady irritably replied that she was not, although her sharp tone and facial expressions clearly revealed hidden irritation and resentment. Turning around, the aristocrat quietly but firmly ordered the maid to go immediately and make tea, tolerating no objections and expecting flawless execution. The priest, standing nearby, turned his attention to Irene, a new servant who had recently started working at the mansion and seemed not yet quite accustomed to her role. Noticing the terrible burn marks on the girl's face, the kind man decided to offer his help to the poor girl, sympathetically realizing that she probably needed support and care. Smiling sweetly, the cute guy with long hair explained that he worked at a healing temple and specialized in healing wounds and burns, assuring that he could help in this situation. Blanche quickly and confidently replied that everything was fine, noting that the wounds had long since stopped causing pain and that she was feeling much better, so her condition did not require any additional attention or intervention. However, the doctor was persistent, declaring that if the maid was worried about money, then she should not be paid a penny at all, and offered help without any financial demands. Blanche began to realize that she was in a difficult situation because if the treatment continued, the secret she had so carefully concealed might be revealed. The maid strictly stated that if the maid agreed to the treatment, she would be immediately expelled from her home mansion forever without any proceedings or regrets. For the first time, the girl felt relief from her sister's hostile nature, since it was precisely this unpleasant aspect that helped to keep the big secret preventing its disclosure. The man in the room asked the aristocrat to refrain from harsh words towards the poor maid, and to think carefully again before making a final decision. Mariette herself explained that, against the backdrop of the ugly servants, the charming noblewoman looked much more beautiful, emphasizing the contrast between their appearances. After this, the lady, with difficulty holding back tears, added that beauty was the only thing she had left, and that it was now her last consolation and source of self-respect preserved, despite all her experiences. Mariette screamed and said desperately that she had to look as beautiful as possible at the wedding, emphasizing that this was the only way to show her true worth on this special day. The cup shattered with a deafening crash, sending shards flying in all directions, creating a mess on the floor and attracting the attention of everyone in the room. Turning away with a look of determination on her face, the noblewoman confidently headed towards the exit. Her steps sounded confident and firm, as if she had already made the decision to leave this place and did not intend to return. The priest strongly warned the gentleman not to even think about following the lady for his own well-being and safety, advising him to remain where he was and not to interfere with what was happening. The aristocrat, having apologized to Irene for the behavior of his sister, who was very nervous before the important ceremony, expressed regret for the inconvenience caused and promised that in the future, everything would be done to improve the situation. The servant bent down to begin collecting the sharp shards scattered across the floor, carefully picking up each piece and trying not to miss a single one in order to return order to the large room. But at that moment, Blanche suddenly cut herself, and blood began to flow from her finger, dripping onto the floor and drawing attention to her accident amid the hustle and bustle and rubbish everywhere. The compassionate priest, without wasting any time, rushed to the servant, offering his assistance in providing first aid and treating the wound, trying to ease her suffering and stop the bleeding. Their hands met in a gentle touch, from which a bright light flashed, illuminating the space around and filling it with a special magical radiance. The maid quickly pulled her hand back, looking in fear at the source of the bright light that had suddenly and blindingly flared upon their contact. Fear was reflected in her eyes, and her heart beat faster from surprise and alarm. When the man began to reveal a secret about Blanche, the lady, not wanting this information to reach the aristocrat, immediately intervened to prevent the truth from being revealed. However, the doctor couldn't resist and uttered the maiden's true name, causing a shock. This changed the boys' perception of the situation and called into question everything they had previously known. Pierre cautiously informed his acquaintance that he had apparently mentioned the deceased's name by accident. The name had sounded so unexpected and significant in the conversation that he suspected it might change their understanding of current events. The healer himself began to tell the boy that during healing he had a unique ability to see the patient's true personality through their outer masks and deceptive facades. The man confessed to his master that the servant's aura was identical to that of the deceased Blanche. This astonishing coincidence led him to believe that there might be a connection between them. Suddenly, the Marquis entered the room, demanding that the doctor immediately repeat everything he had said earlier. His voice was stern, emphasizing the importance and urgency of repeating the information. The aristocrat was not ready to accept the shocking and incredible truth that his daughter, whom he thought was dead and mourned for, was actually alive and among them, which completely turned his perception of reality upside down. Blanche had no plans to return to her family. All she really wanted was to rescue Ricardo from prison and rob the treasury to secure financial independence and power for herself and her allies. The castle was large and majestic, inspiring awe with its grandiose architecture and majestic towers that seemed to reach for the sky. Mariette moved forward, with a brisk pace along the stone corridor, her footsteps echoing in the silence as her gaze focused ahead, searching for a way out of the gloomy labyrinth. Suddenly, the beautiful girl stopped short when she heard rumors that Irene was supposedly a spy. Events that had previously seemed insignificant took on new meaning. Without wasting time on reflection, Mariette quickly and deftly hid behind a column, trying to remain unnoticed, so that she could eavesdrop on someone else's conversation with genuine interest and learn all the subtleties and details of what was happening. It turned out that Count Juan and his subordinate exchanged secrets in the dark and shadowed corners of the mansion, where their conversations were hidden from prying eyes. Giacomo told the owner that the maid who had recently arrived at the mansion came from a city known for its gangs and mafia, and this raised serious doubts in him. Boy carefully removed the mask Irene used to completely hide her face, thereby ensuring absolute anonymity, protecting her identity from unwanted views and possible disclosure. The beautiful Mariette watched in amazement as the mysterious land of the scarred maid opened up, and as Giacomo handed the Count a cloth that seemed to carry special meaning and hidden secrets. The girl finally began to understand the terrible truth, gradually revealing itself to her, like darkness plunging her into terrible realizations and unknown depths of fear. It turned out that the maid whom everyone thought dead and long buried was in fact Blanche, and this discovery shocked everyone who believed in a sad loss. Clutching the evidence in his hand, Juan instantly realized that this was the work of the evil mafioso Elio, whose cunning manipulations were now made obvious by the evidence he had found. The aristocrat immediately demanded that Giacomo immediately find out where Ricardo was at that moment, in order to learn about his whereabouts and take the necessary actions. The guy agreed that he would immediately check whether the boy was in prison and take the necessary measures to clarify his location and condition. Suddenly, a loud cry was heard, sounding like a call, which persistently repeated the name Giacomo, attracting attention and forcing one to immediately turn one's gaze to it. It turned out that it was Mariette, who with a mysterious smile and a confident gait walked towards the men as if she had her own plan and determination, leaving no doubt about her goal. The lady intervened in someone else's conversation concerning Irene, attracting attention with her sudden appearance and expressive participation in the discussion, which immediately changed its course. Mariette began to defend the ugly servant, claiming that she had worked in their mansion since childhood, when the noblewoman was still a child, and therefore deserved trust and respect. The boys realized that they had been wrong in their suspicions about the maid, realizing that their conclusions were incorrect, and that she had nothing to do with the problems that had arisen. Giacomo quietly whispered in the gentleman's ear that it seemed he had been wrong in expressing his doubts and his awareness of the error of their previous suspicions. Mariette was lost in thought about her little sister's arrival, imagining how her presence would change the current situation and how it would affect her own plans and feelings. Smiling, the lady noted how remarkably similar their faces were, emphasizing the family resemblance and expressing satisfaction at this remarkable coincidence. And the lady noticed how easy it was to substitute Blanche for Mariette at the altar, so that she would marry and spend her wedding night with the Count, leaving no suspicion and ensuring the successful completion of the plan. Placing her hand on her stomach, the lady realized that, in this case, the secret could be kept hidden from prying eyes and ensuring complete confidentiality. At this time, Blanche learned the secret that her older sister had been pregnant for some time, and this unexpected information shocked her, revealing new and unexpected circumstances to her. The man told the lady that the third prince had refused to acknowledge his child and accept Mariette into the royal family, which was a significant blow to their plans and caused great concern. The conversation was interrupted by the Marquis's eldest daughter, who warmly greeted her father and thereby returned the attention of everyone present to the important event. Passing them, the aristocrat ordered everyone to leave the room immediately so she could prepare for the upcoming ceremony. After this, Mariette added that everyone had left the room except Irene. Blanche, without uttering a word, obediently submitted to her elder sister's order, feeling the weight of the word fall on her fragile shoulders, but she did not dare object. The lady dressed as a maid was absorbed in thoughts of how to find both keys to the treasury, and she did not care at all about her own family. Blanche made the final decision to wait patiently until Mariette fell into a deep sleep, knowing that only then would the perfect moment for her plan come. Unexpectedly, the beautiful beauty quickly and decisively tore the disguise from her colleague's face, revealing his true identity and threatening the carefully hidden secret. This unexpected action caused Blanche deep displeasure. Irritation grew inside her because her carefully thought-out plan had been disrupted, and now it was necessary to act differently. With a slightly mocking grin, Mariette greeted her little sister, her eyes sparkling with warmth that hid something more that remained unclear. The maid, without thinking twice, turned away, trying to avoid the unpleasant company of her relative as quickly as possible, feeling a growing desire to leave this place. The noblewoman gave the order to Blanche to stop where she was. Her voice was firm and decisive, clearly emphasizing the importance of this instruction. The little girl stopped, but did not miss the opportunity to warn that Mariette had no right to give orders left and right. This tone was full of confidence and slight irritation. The upset aristocrat stated with obvious regret that she had in fact saved her sister from exposure since Giacomo suspected Irene, and this certainly required special attention. This came as a shock to the beauty, as the man was not supposed to know about Blanche's hidden true identity, which ruined all her carefully laid plans. Mariette asked her beloved sister not to worry, as the duo had already covered her, providing the necessary protection and support in the current situation. With bewilderment and confusion, the lady asked why they had helped her, not understanding the true motives and reasons for such unexpected nobility. It turned out that the aristocrat had a request, and in exchange for her help, the rich woman was ready to provide a service, having first established the terms of cooperation. Mariette stated that she would not demand anything from Blanche without offering any form of compensation or reward in return, emphasizing her desire for honesty in the relationship. With a slight smirk, the beauty declared that she knew where the key to the treasury was. These words were full of confidence and mysterious charm. With a malicious grin, the lady added that if her sister fulfilled her request, she would gladly tell her where the necessary thing was, hinting at her desire to manipulate the situation. Blanche asked if her relative was truly happy with Irene taking all the treasures for herself. Mariette merely shrugged indifferently, without expressing the slightest interest or concern. Contorted with disgust, the girl added that she was ready to agree to anything, just not to spend the night with a dirty and disgusting creature like Juan. Turning away from her sister, Blanche agreed to the deal, seeking to profit from the proposed exchange and take advantage of the situation. The maiden was already thinking to herself how in the future Mariette would regret her choice, regarding her sister, sensing that the consequences might turn out to be far from what she expected. The dungeon was built of solid stone, which gave it impressive strength and reliability, creating a feeling of impenetrability and permanence. Riccardo sat on his bed in prison, feeling the weight of his situation and looking at the gray walls, which seemed especially oppressive at that moment. A happy smile appeared on the boy's face when he saw the guest, and joy sparkled in his eyes, reflecting genuine enthusiasm and a warm welcome to the newcomer. The guest turned out to be Blanche, elegantly dressed in a snow-white dress with lace ruffles and exquisite jewelry, which gave her an impeccable, sophisticated, and captivating look. Like a loyal mafioso's dog who diligently and relentlessly complimented his companion, Blanche noted that Riccardo's health had improved significantly, and his stress levels had dropped significantly. The little girl tenderly handed the boy a small bag of money. Riccardo must be the first to leave this terrible place. The boy, trembling with terror and excitement, asked tensely if Blanche was going to leave everything behind and go with him in search of the long-awaited freedom that promised deliverance from endless fear. The beautiful girl refused, justifying herself by saying that she had urgent matters to attend to in this house that required her immediate attention and resolution. Turning away, the girl said with obvious condemnation that it was precisely these kinds of reasons that forced the guy to return to his hometown, first leaving Blanche here with urgent matters. Suddenly, Ricardo stopped the beauty, looking at her with charm. He invited her to go with him, hoping to spend time in company and make this moment special. With tears in his eyes, the boy added that no matter what Blanche did, he was ready to support her in any situation, expressing his unconditional devotion and willingness to be there no matter the circumstances. In a cold and merciless tone, the aristocrat ordered the boy to pull himself together. The words, imbued with stern nobility, sounded like an inexorable command calling for self-control and courage. The mafia boss's son immediately flinched in surprise and immediately fell silent, feeling the pressure and tension of the situation that left him no opportunity to continue the conversation. Blanche explained her decision by saying that Ricardo could become a serious obstacle, interfering with her carefully laid plans and creating additional complications that could make it more difficult to achieve her goals. With his head down, the boy felt deeply irritated and uneasy that someone considered him a nuisance and a loser, which hurt his self-esteem and caused a feeling of bitterness and insecurity. The boy, sobbing, asked if he had met the lovely lady again, his voice trembling with excitement and regret. And he waited impatiently for an answer, hoping for a miracle or confirmation of his feelings. Blanche, wanting to somehow console her companion, tenderly hugged Ricardo. The feminine touch was full of warmth and care, trying to bring at least a little comfort and peace to the confused state. Looking at her crying and embarrassed interlocutor, the aristocrat thought to herself about how she could profitably use the mafioso in the future, carefully planning how to extract the maximum benefit from this situation. The lantern burned with its last strength, illuminating the space with a dim light, as this was the last time the flickering light penetrated the darkness, foreshadowing the imminent onset of complete darkness. The wedding hall was exquisitely decorated, with white linens and furniture adorned with fresh flowers. Every detail was carefully chosen to create an atmosphere of elegance and solemnity, emphasizing the importance of the occasion. The red hair was neatly secured with black clips that contrasted with the bright hue, creating a striking and stylish look. Mariette mercilessly cut her locks with scissors, each movement full of determination and resolution, as if she was trying to get rid of something superfluous and unnecessary. Now, the older sister played the role of a servant, braiding the wig on the head of her younger sister with special attention and care, striving to create the perfect image for her. Around her neck was an exquisite pearl chain encrusted with deep gemstones that sparkled and shimmered in the light. The lady was ready to become the bride of a wealthy count, eagerly awaiting the upcoming union, which promised her not only material well-being, but also social status, opening up new horizons and opportunities. Mariette stood by in the role of maid as she and the lady had reversed roles, which brought an unexpected element to the situation and allowed her to take part in the new duties. The Marquis joined the team, asking if his daughter was ready for the wedding, inquiring how she felt about the upcoming event, and whether she was ready for the important changes it would bring. Turning to face the aristocrat, the noblewoman confidently replied that she was completely prepared for the upcoming wedding. Her words were full of determination and confidence, reflecting her readiness for this important step in life. The daughter's hand, fragile as the finest porcelain, softly and tenderly rested on the man's strong, confident hand, as if seeking support and protection in it. The father, containing his excitement and filled with pride, carefully escorted his dear relative to the altar, where her future husband, ready to link his fate with her, was eagerly awaiting her. The guests clapped their hands with joy and delight, congratulating the happy newlyweds and sincerely sharing with them their warmth and good wishes for the future. Mariette was pleased that her naive sister so easily agreed to spend her wedding night with this grumpy old man, who no one had liked for a long time. The aristocrat was genuinely perplexed as to how anyone could seriously believe that she possessed knowledge of the location of the key to the treasury, where all the riches and family secrets passed down from generation to generation were kept. Suddenly, Mr. Giacomo entered the room, and his unexpected appearance frightened Mariette so much that she involuntarily stepped back, feeling her heart beat faster with anxiety. The man rudely stated that he had to make sure that the maid was not a spy, and his harsh tone made it clear that he was not going to let the matter slide. Giacomo extended his hand towards the maid's face. the gesture full of menace and tension, as if he intended to scrutinize every detail of her expression and intentions. With a sharp movement of his hand, Giacomo tore the mask from the lady's face, and thus became convinced that the servant had been deceiving everyone all this time, hiding her true identity and intentions. With a smirk, the gentleman called the girl an idiot sent by Elio, clearly expressing contempt and not hiding his satisfaction at the exposure of the deception. However, Giacomo's grin turned to shock when he learned that behind the maid's mask was hiding Mariette, who at that time was supposed to walk down the aisle to the Count, which completely changed the situation. Giacomo, sweating all over and trying to comprehend the situation, anxiously asked who was currently with the rich aristocrat instead of the expected lady. Juan and Blanche stood side by side, their hands intertwined and their gazes full of tenderness, as the priest spoke the solemn words linking their destinies and symbolizing the beginning of their shared journey in life. The girl mentally reflected on how easy it would be to take the key from the Count when they were alone, and how a cunning plan could be carried out in the moment of their solitude. Blanche immediately realized that Mariette was lying, since the system had already notified her of the discrepancy in the information, which confirmed all her suspicions. Nevertheless, the little girl was confident in her abilities and believed that she could easily take the key from the vile nobleman, despite all the difficulties that might arise. With a joyful smile, Juan carefully lifted the beautiful bride's veil, enjoying the moment when the tender face appeared before him again, full of great happiness and excitement. A marquise with long red hair was watching them, his gaze full of interest and hidden emotions. He was closely following what was happening. On Blanche's face, as she imagined how her relatives would react to finding out they were penniless, and how their faces would express shock and disappointment. In the crowd stood a man with a lantern on his belt, which suddenly went out, having exhausted all its fuel, and now the dim light that once illuminated the surroundings left only darkness and obscurity. He watched Blanche intently as she was embraced by the scoundrel, and this moment, filled with contradictions, caused him deep inner irritation and a feeling of discontent. Ricardo couldn't believe what was happening. His mind refused to accept the reality of the events unfolding before him, and he was shocked by the unexpectedness and scale of everything that was happening, which made him feel completely lost. From the very beginning, the boy carefully watched the newlyweds and the priest standing nearby, his curious gaze not missing a single moment of their ceremony, absorbed in every detail, from soft whispers to solemn words. Giacomo, shocked by what he saw, noticed Ricardo, who in his opinion should be rotting in the dungeon, and this unexpected appearance caused him deep confusion and anxiety. 6 hours ago, at midnight, a horse galloped in the darkness, its great hooves thundering on the pavement, leaving behind only an echo in the silence of the night. The boy obeyed his teacher's order and rode his horse to a safe place, carefully following the instructions to ensure his safety and complete the task. A few hours later, morning came, and the boy, breathing heavily and with difficulty catching his breath, finally found time to rest, feeling how the fatigue from prolonged tension and effort gradually receded. In freedom, he could finally feel alive, experience the fullness of life, and freedom that had previously seemed unattainable under conditions of constant stress and restriction. Suddenly, the mafia boss's son noticed a wizard standing in the square, singing a song about a beautiful girl whose portrait was displayed on a banner, and who was about to get married, which attracted attention and aroused curiosity. Ricardo, looking at the portrait, was deeply surprised to recognize in the image his savior Blanche, whose face was so familiar and significant to him. Having changed into a classic suit, the boy was surprised to realize where he knew the girl in the painting from, and was amazed at how suddenly all the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, opening up long-forgotten memories to him. A clever magician with long blonde hair said that the boy was probably from a distant land and did not know about the girl depicted in the painting, who was the beauty of the continent. With a smile, he shared with Ricardo the news of Lady Mariette's imminent marriage to a wealthy count, which would apparently take place in the near future. Without wasting any time to think, the boy quickly headed towards his horse, deftly jumped into the saddle, and full of determination, rushed back to the castle, trying to return as quickly as possible and sort out the situation. With a sly grin, Juan announced to his guests that he now intended to go to his chambers to retire with the most beautiful lady in the entire country, to relax and enjoy the company. Ricardo, watching the sweet couple from the side, could not understand how Blanche could fall in love with this older man, and was immersed in thoughts about what could have attracted her to him and made her choose such a scoundrel. The boy could not understand whether this choice was solely the result of Lady Blanche's decision, or whether someone else had pressured her into making this decision, which left him in the dark about the true motives. Tears appeared in the eyes of the future villain when he realized that his beloved had chosen another man, and this deep realization caused him great grief and disappointment. Suddenly, the mafioso's hand was grabbed by another guy's hand, interrupting his sad thoughts and forcing him to pay attention to the unexpected turn of events. Hearing the familiar voice of the tormentor, Ricardo felt a cold sweat run through his entire body, and fear like an icy wave engulfed him again, making him tremble with horror. It was Giacomo who asked the boy with persistent interest what he had been doing outside his prison, carefully observing his reaction and trying to understand the reasons for his escape. A terrible image of a sadist who had once caused him great pain instantly arose in his memory, and this memory again evoked deep fear and anxiety in his soul, intensifying all the internal tension. Ricardo knew he should run immediately, but his legs seemed to be frozen with fear and refused to obey, not allowing him to take a single step. The boy's stress increased sharply, and his internal state became so tense that the boy felt panic taking over him completely. Seeing the lantern hanging on his interlocutor's belt, Giacomo reluctantly reached for it, mockingly calling the object trash and demonstrating his contempt and disdain for it. The boy's mind immediately flashed back to the memory of Blanche, giving him this jewel, and this memory brought a bitter feeling of loss and regret. Pushing Giacomo away, the boy firmly ordered him not to touch the lantern, the man's voice filled with determination and fear, mixed with concern for the precious gift. Moreover, he stepped on the foot of his former tormentor, hoping to hurt him and try to escape from the situation, trying to buy himself at least a little time to escape. From the sharp pain, his face distorted with fear and anger, and he began to angrily shout offensive words at his interlocutor, not holding back his furious discontent and resentment. Ricardo took off, running his thoughts focused on one goal: finding Blanche as quickly as possible. The mafioso ignored all obstacles in his path and was oblivious to the world around him, striving towards his goal with determination. Giacomo, without losing a second, quickly rushed after the fugitive, determined not to lose sight of him and to catch up with him as quickly as possible, despite all the obstacles and difficulties in his path. The man was right next to the boy. His heavy breathing could be felt on the fugitive's back, and every second dragged on in tense silence, full of anxious anticipation, as if the very atmosphere was permeated with a sense of imminent danger. Suddenly, with incredible strength and determination, a strong hand grabbed Ricardo by the shoulder, as if foreshadowing an approaching storm, and leaving no chance of salvation. The boy fell to the ground, and his tormentor, not expecting such a turn of events, found himself pinned against him. At that moment, the lantern, torn from its bracket, crashed to the floor and shattered into 1,000 pieces, creating a vivid and disturbing spectacle. Ricardo was deeply upset when he saw the gift from Blanche, which he treasured so much, shattered and broke, which dealt him quite a blow. As if possessed, Giacomo admired the expression of horror on the prisoner's face, not missing the opportunity to call him by the name of his father, whose name was Ilio Giotto. The rapist, delighted, said with satisfaction that the prisoner's expression perfectly matched the situation and only emphasized the gross humiliation. With tears rolling down his cheeks, Ricardo, trembling with pain and despair, begged for forgiveness. His voice was full of fear and hope as he earnestly asked to be released, dreaming of the opportunity to see the light again and find freedom. The man only liked it. Hearing the prisoner's requests and pleas gave him special pleasure. Every cry for help and tears only intensified the perverted pleasure. But suddenly, unexpectedly, and without any warning, Giacomo lost consciousness, and as if by an invisible force, collapsed right on the guy's shoulder. Stood behind him, her gaze icy and dispassionate, as she mercilessly knocked out her tormentor like a fierce frosty wind sweeping away everything in its path. Ricardo, breathing heavily and barely controlling his pulse, did not take his admiring gaze off his savior, as if every gesture was a source of incredible relief and hope. Blanche placed her finger to her lips and ordered Giacomo to be quiet in the middle of the night. Her gaze was full of imperious severity and confidence, as if she expected absolute silence. The Count's subordinate was unable to rise from his place. His body trembled with weakness, and a cough accompanied by blood escaped from him like his last breath before inevitable death. The aristocrat himself was genuinely happy to see Blanche. Her presence filled the guy's face with joy, as if he had met an old friend or received long-awaited relief. The lady was extremely unhappy with the boy's return and was thinking about how to punish the stupid son of a mafioso who could not follow simple instructions. The irritated aristocrat began to lightly hit the boy on the back, her actions full of hidden contempt and displeasure. Every light touch expressed her deep resentment at his behavior. Feeling her anger sweet, Ricardo began to beg for forgiveness, and the words flowed like a stream filled with sincere repentance and a desire to correct the mistake before the lady. Having calmed down, Blanche asked with genuine concern how her interlocutor was feeling. Her voice was filled with genuine tenderness and a desire to understand his state of mind after what had happened, as if she were trying to ease the burden of his experience. The embarrassed mafioso replied that he felt fine, trying to hide his inner tension behind an outward calm, although the tone of his voice revealed nervousness and anxiety. Having made sure that the boy was all right, Blanche returned to Giacomo to punish the offender. Her determination was unbreakable, and she intended to achieve justice for the insults and disturbance caused. Ricardo trembled with fear as he watched the cruelty with which the little lady punished her tormentor. The blood sprang out, emphasizing the relentless fury. The little girl stopped the moment she realized that Giacomo was in a deep blackout, lying motionless, as if lulled by the night's peace. Ricardo, trembling with excitement and fear, asked with deep confusion what exactly the lady had done to this man, and for what reason she had beaten him so cruelly, leaving many questions and perplexities. It turned out that the reason for such cruel behavior on the part of Blanche was that she was unsuccessfully searching for the key to the treasury, and her disappointment and despair expressed themselves in this violence. The aristocrat presented a key adorned with a red gemstone and declared that it had to look just like that to meet expectations. Wanting to be helpful, Ricardo loudly declared that he was ready to help in finding the necessary item, hoping in this way to make his contribution to resolving the situation. The mafioso began a meticulous examination of the tormentor's clothes, hoping with all her might to find a clue that could become a key element in solving the entire situation, and shed light on complex and confusing aspects. With his last strength, the man opened his eyes, and looking at the boy with difficulty, uttered the name Ilio, hoping in this way to hurt him and leave an indelible mark on his fragile soul. This caused a storm of anger in Ricardo, who, gritting his teeth from the tension, could hardly keep from exploding with rage and indignation, like a volcano ready to erupt. Unable to contain his pent-up rage and anger any longer, the boy, with complete determination, delivered a crushing blow to the tormentor's face, and in this brutal act, he released all his emotions, overcoming his internal contradictions. In complete shock, the boy continued to stare at his fist, amazed at how his own could express such a powerful and abrupt act of violence. After this, Blanche gently placed her hand on the boy's shoulder. A note of sincere approval sounded in the woman's voice, and the little girl praised him for having managed to find the key, saying that he was really a good boy. However, replacing her joy with anger, the girl soon added that in addition to the key she had found, there was another unfinished business that required immediate attention and resolution. Smiling sweetly, the aristocrat declared that now the mafioso's son no longer had to fear the dead rapist, assuring him that the threat had been completely eliminated and all fears were behind him. The boy, filled with distrust, carefully took the hand of the girl, whose cloaks were dyed bright red, as if hoping that this gesture would help dispel his doubts and fears. Confused and at the same time happy, Ricardo walked behind his savior, ready to follow her, anywhere, even to the ends of the earth, demonstrating his complete commitment and gratitude. After this, with deep emotion and anxiety, he carefully asked if Blanche had killed Giacomo, for him trying to understand the true motives of her actions and to realize how this event fits into his own destiny. The girl confirmed that every action, including the tormentor's tragic death, was carried out solely for the well-being of Ricardo. Her words were filled with deep confidence. Tears welled up in the boy's eyes, as for the first time in his life, he felt that someone truly and deeply cared for him, and this unusual and touching act touched his very heart. The lady gripped the mafioso's hand tighter, thinking that his help could prove quite valuable in the future. Therefore, it was important to keep him close, so that at the right moment she would have a reliable ally at hand. Blanche needed to gain the full trust of the future villain in order to establish a strong bond and ensure flawless cooperation in the future. Moreover, the lady will be able to sell the guy at a high price in the future, thereby ensuring herself a significant profit and strengthening her influence. Soon the couple approached the majestic treasure chamber and with bated breath inserted the keys into the door lock, full of excitement and anticipation, preparing to unlock its secrets and discover what was hidden behind that massive door. Just then, Ricardo suddenly noticed that the doors were not opening, and his anxiety increased, realizing that something might have gone wrong.